Welcome back to another story on Harry vs. X. This time, we're bringing you, what if Sun Wukong found Harry at age 4 in cupboard and made him immortal god of chaos and trickery. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the King. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive smelled like dust and old rubber and the particular kind of silence that settles into small spaces when nobody cares enough to clean them. There was a cot in it, a thin, mean thing with a mattress that had gone lumpy in all the wrong places. There was a shelf above the cot with a single broken crayon and half a spider's web. There was a boy. The boy was 4 years old. His name was Harry James Potter, though nobody on Privet Drive used the James part, and the way the Dursleys said Harry made it sound like something they'd stepped in. He had black hair that went in every direction and never listened to a comb, and he had green eyes that were too bright and too steady for a child who'd spent most of his memory in a cupboard. He was small, the way children get small when they're not fed quite enough, not loved quite enough, not given quite enough of anything except space to exist quietly and cause no trouble. He wasn't crying. That was the thing. A different child might have been crying. A different child, locked in a dark cupboard at 9:30 on a Wednesday night because they'd accidentally turned their cousin's hair blue at breakfast, not on purpose, never on purpose, it had just happened the way things sometimes happened around Harry, would have been sobbing themselves into a headache. But Harry was sitting cross-legged on the lumpy mattress with his chin in his hands, and he was thinking. He was thinking about the spider. There was a wolf spider living in the upper left corner of the cupboard, and Harry had spent the last 3 nights watching it rebuild a section of its web that Dudley had torn through with a stick during one of his periodic raids on Harry's space. The spider hadn't gotten upset. The spider hadn't cried or begged or asked why. The spider had simply assessed the damage, figured out what needed doing, and started doing it. Harry thought the spider was probably the smartest creature on Privet Drive. He was still thinking about it when the wall cracked. Not broke, cracked. A single hairline fracture from floor to ceiling, and then a sound like something very large exhaling after holding its breath for 1,000 years, and then the crack split open sideways like an eyelid, and gold light poured through it, hot and chaotic, smelling of peach blossoms and lightning. Harry didn't scream. He leaned forward. A foot came through first, a bare foot, broad and calloused, attached to a leg in animal skin trousers. Then a torso, a shoulder, an arm, and finally a head. The head had a face that was simultaneously the most ancient thing Harry had ever seen and the most alive, sharp eyes, amber gold in the dark, set in a face that was human in most respects except for a certain quality around the jaw and the brow and the grin, which was too wide and too knowing and held too many teeth to be entirely mortal. He was dressed in a golden battle robe over the animal skins, half-fastened, like he'd gotten dressed in a hurry or simply hadn't bothered to finish. He had a staff across his back, long, plain, iron-capped, and a circlet of phoenix feathers around his head that glowed faintly, like embers refusing to go out. He looked around the cupboard with those amber eyes, taking in the cobwebs and the broken crayon and the spider and the boy. He sniffed once, sharp and precise, the way animals do. Then he looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "Ha," the man said. His voice was rough-edged and warm, like a fire that wasn't done deciding whether to be comfortable or catastrophic. He had an accent that didn't belong to any country, exactly, because it was older than countries. "You're not scared?" "Should I be?" Harry asked. The man's grin spread. "Most things are." "Are you going to hurt me?" "No." Harry considered this with the gravity of a 4-year-old who has learned to evaluate statements for honesty. "Okay," he said. Then, because manners cost nothing and his cupboard didn't get many visitors, "Do you want to sit down?" The man looked at the tiny cot and the 4 inches of floor space and made a sound that was probably laughter, though it was a rougher, stranger sound than any laughter Harry had heard before. He folded himself down onto the floor cross-legged, staff across his knees, and tilted his head at Harry like a crow examining something interesting. "What's your name, little sprout?" "Harry Potter." "What's yours?" "Sun Wukong," the man said, and the name hit the air of the cupboard like a stone hitting water, rings spreading outward, something in the darkness flinching from the vibration of it. Among other things. Also, the great sage equal to heaven, the handsome monkey king, the one who cracked the Jade Emperor's throne room floor and thought it was funny, the one who stole the peaches of immortality and ate them all before anyone could stop him, the one who, he paused. Well. The list is long and mostly impressive. You can call me Wukong. Wukong, Harry repeated carefully, trying out the shape of it. Good. The man, Wukong, leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying Harry with an intensity that wasn't threatening, exactly, but was thorough in the way that sunlight is thorough when it gets into a space and lights up all the dust. Why are you in a cupboard? I turned Dudley's hair blue. On purpose? No. It just happened. Wukong's eyes sharpened. Does things just happen around you often? Harry thought about the teacher at school who'd found him on the roof when he'd been running from Dudley and his gang, and there was no way he'd gotten up there because the door to the roof was locked and he didn't know how to fly. He thought about the glass in the snake enclosure at the zoo last summer that had simply disappeared. He thought about the time his hair had grown back overnight after Aunt Petunia had cut it to stubble and she'd been furious for a week. Yes, he said. Wukong sat back and was quiet for a moment. Whatever he was thinking moved across his face in ways Harry couldn't decode, quick and complex, like weather. Then, how long have you lived in here? Always, Harry said. Then, because that wasn't quite accurate, since I was 1, I think. Aunt Petunia says my mum and dad died in a car crash and I've been trouble ever since. Something happened in Wukong's expression. It wasn't pity, Harry knew pity, had seen it occasionally on the faces of strangers who'd clocked the cupboard door or the too big clothes, and it was always wet and useless. This was different. This was the face of someone who recognized something. Who saw a shape they knew. Your parents didn't die in a car crash, Wukong said, matter of fact, no cushioning. I can smell the magic on you. Old magic. Deliberate magic. Somebody put a protection on you and put you here on purpose, little sprout. Harry was quiet. Then, who? I don't know yet. I only just got here. Wukong reached back and unslung his staff, holding it flat across his palms. As Harry watched, it shrank, from the length of a man to the length of an arm to the length of a finger, and then Wukong tucked it behind his ear like a pen. I travel, he explained, though Harry hadn't asked. I get bored. I follow interesting things. You are an interesting thing. I'm not interesting, Harry said. I'm trouble. Aunt Petunia says so. Aunt Petunia, Wukong said, in a voice that managed to be polite and damning simultaneously, sounds like she's never met anything real in her life. He looked at Harry steadily. Do you know what I am? You said you were a monkey king. I am. Among other things, I'm a god. Immortal. I've lived 68,000 years, give or take a few centuries I spent under a mountain. He said this the way someone says I've lived in Manchester, give or take a few years I spent in Leeds, casually, without performance, which somehow made it more believable than any amount of drama would have. I'm also a teacher, when I find someone worth teaching. I've only found it twice before. Harry absorbed this. The spider had finished its repairs and was sitting in the center of its web. What do you teach? Everything, Wukong said. But mostly I teach people how to be what they actually are instead of what they've been told they are. He tilted his head, the ember glow of the phoenix circlet catching the thin light. What have you been told you are, Harry Potter? The list was long and Harry had most of it memorized. Freak. Burden. Accident. Trouble. Nothing. He recited them quietly, the way he'd learned to say things that hurt, fast and flat, to get through them. Wukong listened without interrupting. When Harry finished, the Monkey King was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then he said, with complete and simple authority, all of that is wrong. Something in Harry's chest moved. He pressed it down, because he'd learned that hope was a thing that cost you later, but it moved anyway. So what am I really? He asked. Wukong smiled. It was the smile of someone standing at the edge of something enormous and finding it delightful. I don't know yet. But I intend to find out. And I think you should come with me. Harry looked at the cupboard. The spider. The broken crayon. The shelf. The thin mattress. He looked back at Wukong. Where would we go? He asked. Everywhere, Wukong said. And then back. You've got things to do in this world, I can smell that too. Destiny has a particular stench, not pleasant, but it doesn't just wash off. But we've got time. You're 4. Destiny can wait. I'd have to tell Aunt Petunia. Wukong reached into his robe and produced a peach. It was perfect, round and flushed rose gold, with a warmth to it that had nothing to do with temperature, and the smell of it filled the cupboard like the memory of summer. He held it out to Harry. Before any of that. I want you to eat this. Harry looked at it. What is it? A peach of immortality. Grew in the gardens of the Queen Mother of the West, tended for 3,000 years, ripens once every 10,000, grants divine immortality to whoever eats it. He said this as if reading a label. I've got a few left. Ate most of them myself, back in the day, but I kept some. I keep things that are worth keeping. Will it hurt? Yes, Wukong said, honestly. It'll feel like being unmade and put back together. All the mortal bits of you will burn away and what's underneath will come up instead. He paused. But it won't take long. And you're already tougher than you think. Harry looked at the peach. He could feel something coming off it, warmth, yes, but also a hum, a frequency, something that resonated with the same place in his chest that made hair grow back overnight and glass disappear and rooftops accessible through locked doors. Like a sound he'd always heard but never been able to identify was suddenly being played on an instrument he could see. What will I be after? He asked. Immortal, Wukong said. And something more. I've got a few things to give you beyond the peach, titles, domains, a nature that will grow with you. But that part comes after. First, eat. Harry reached out and took the peach. It was warm in his hand, and the skin was impossibly soft, and when he bit into it the juice ran down his chin and tasted like, he couldn't find the word for it, not then and not for years afterward. Sunlight, maybe, if sunlight had been fermented for centuries. Possibility. The taste of the moment just before something happens. He ate the whole thing. Core and all, because it seemed right. The seed dissolved on his tongue like salt. Then the burning started. It wasn't an external thing, it didn't touch his skin. It started at the center of him, wherever the center of a person actually is, and it moved outward like water moving through dry ground, and everywhere it went it remade things. Harry curled over on the mattress and pressed his fists against his sternum and breathed through it, and Wukong sat across from him and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do, because there was nothing to say. The process was vast. That was the only word for it. The sensation of being expanded, of borders that Harry hadn't known he had dissolving, of spaces opening up inside him that had always been there but compressed into smallness by circumstance and malnutrition and the steady work of being told you were nothing. He felt his magic, his real magic, the deep tectonic kind, not the accident magic of turned hair and disappeared glass but the raw fundamental stuff of it, shift from a frantic, caged thing into something that spread and breathed and filled its actual shape. He felt other things come in alongside it. Chaos. He felt it like he felt his own heartbeat, inherent, natural, rhythmic. Not destruction, not cruelty, but the primal force of change, the fundamental quality of a universe that refuses to be static. He felt it settle into him like a second skeleton. And trickery, not deception for cruelty's sake, but the intelligence of the trickster, the divine wit that sees the seams in things, the gap between what is and what people think is, the space where a mind quick enough to fit through the gap can move the world. He felt that too, clear and cold and bright, like a key that had always been in his pocket but he'd never thought to check. When it was done, Harry uncurled. He looked at his hands. They looked the same. He looked at Wukong. Is it finished? The first part, Wukong said. He was watching Harry with that amber gaze that was simultaneously ancient and genuinely interested. How do you feel? Harry thought about it seriously. Bigger, he said. On the inside. Wukong made that sound again, the rough fire laugh. Good answer. He reached behind his ear, took out the staff, and let it expand to its full length, as tall as the cupboard, then taller, its head pressing through the ceiling and the ceiling simply accommodating it, the physics of the space warping slightly to allow for the staff's presence in the way a river warps around a stone. He pressed one hand flat against the staff's iron cap and murmured something in a language that wasn't Mandarin or any human tongue but was older than both, and where his palm touched the iron, light moved. 3 things, he said, and his voice had changed register, still his, still warm and irreverent, but weighted now with something ceremonial, the way the same person sounds different in a church than at a table. 3 things I give you alongside the immortality, little sprout, so listen. Harry sat up straight. He felt, vaguely, that this was the kind of moment that deserved sitting up straight. First, Wukong said. Domain. You are now the god of chaos and trickery, the celestial principle of change and divine wit given mortal form and then made immortal. You don't rule these things. You are them. The way I am fighting in transformation and freedom. You carry your domain in your blood and it'll grow as you grow. You understand? I think so, Harry said. Good. Second. He reached into his robe and produced a thin golden band, barely a ring, more like a thread of spun gold, and leaned forward and pressed it against Harry's temple. It didn't stay there the way jewelry stays. It sank in. Harry felt it settle into him like the chaos had, naturally, without resistance. A mark. Not a fetter, I had a fetter once and I have very strong feelings about fetters, but a mark. It'll show when your power's fully active. You'll understand it when you see it. Harry touched his temple. Nothing there to feel, from the outside. But he was aware of it, vaguely, the way you're aware of your own pulse when you pay attention. Third, Wukong said, and he paused here, which was unusual. Harry was already learning that Wukong didn't pause much. A name. The peach makes you immortal. The domain makes you divine. But a name makes you real in the way the celestial courts understand real. You'll keep Harry Potter. It's a good name and you'll need it for what comes. But your divine name is, and here he said a word in that old impossible language that Harry felt more than heard, a word that tasted like ozone and tasted like laughter and sat in the air of the cupboard and did not dissipate the way words do but settled and remained. In the language humans have, it translates roughly to, the laughing calamity. The one who makes heaven nervous. The laughing calamity, Harry repeated. Don't say it too often yet. Names like that have weight. You'll grow into it. Wukong stood, and the cupboard accommodated his height the way it had accommodated the staff, reality politely shifting to make room. He looked down at Harry. Now. About the ant. The conversation with the Dursleys was, in Harry's estimation, one of the best things he had ever witnessed, and he'd only been alive for 4 years. Wukong didn't knock. He opened the cupboard from the outside, the lock clicking open before he touched it, which Harry filed away as interesting, and walked into the hallway of number 4 Privet Drive at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday evening like he owned it, which he obviously didn't, but the house seemed briefly uncertain on the matter. Harry followed, blinking in the hallway light. Vernon Dursley came down the stairs in his dressing gown at the noise, face already assembling itself into the particular configuration of outrage it reserved for Harry-related disruptions. He was a large man, wide in the way of men who had been athletic once and then discovered pork chops, with a mustache that he clearly considered distinguished. He stopped on the third stair when he saw Wukong. "What in the, who are you? How did you get in?" "Petunia." He was already red in the face, reaching for the confidence of a man in his own home. "How dare you, Vernon Dursley," Wukong said, pleasantly, looking at Vernon the way Harry's spider looked at flies. "You've been keeping this child in a cupboard." "That's none of your, in a cupboard," Wukong repeated, and the pleasantness in his voice was the kind that had a floor you could fall through, with a broken crayon and a spider. "I have lived for 68,000 years, and I have met emperors, demons, dragon kings, and the worst heaven had to offer, and not one of them, not one, ever put a child in a cupboard." Petunia had appeared at the top of the stairs in her dressing gown, thin and long-necked, with that particular expression she wore around anything she couldn't categorize. She looked at Wukong and went very still. Whatever she saw in his eyes, and there was something in his eyes, something ancient and bright and genuinely dangerous in a way that no amount of bluster could touch, made her grab the banister. "Who are you?" she said, and her voice was much quieter than Vernon's. "Someone who was passing through and found your nephew in a cupboard," Wukong said, turning his gaze to her, and made a decision. He folded his hands behind his back. "I'm taking Harry." "You can't just," Vernon started. "I can," Wukong said, and the word was so simple and so absolute that Vernon's sentence stopped like a car hitting a wall. "I can do, as it happens, quite a lot of things. The question is which of them I choose to do here, in this house, at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday, and how those choices are shaped by how cooperative you decide to be in the next 60 seconds. A silence fell over the hallway that was architectural, weight-bearing. "He'll be back," Wukong continued, in the same pleasant, terrifying tone. "When it's time for him to be back. He has things to do in your world. But he won't be sleeping in a cupboard, and he won't be going without meals, and if I come back and find that either of those things has happened, I will become irritated." He paused. "I was imprisoned once, for being irritating. Imagine what I'm like when I'm irritated." Harry stood in the hallway watching this with his green eyes wide and bright, and he was not afraid, which was the thing that would distinguish him, from this night forward, from nearly every other person who had ever stood near Sun Wukong in a moment like this. He was delighted. Vernon and Petunia had nothing to say. Vernon opened his mouth twice and produced no words. Petunia simply stared, and something moved in her face, not warmth, not regret, but a kind of recognition, the face of someone who has been waiting for a consequence and has finally seen it arrive. "He'll need his things," Harry said, helpfully. "He doesn't have things," Wukong said, glancing back at Harry. "I have the crayon. The crayon is broken. I still want it." Wukong looked at him for a moment, and then that rough fire laugh came again, and he reached into the cupboard and retrieved the broken crayon and handed it to Harry with great ceremony. "Taken. Anything else?" "No," Harry said. Wukong turned back to the Dursleys. "Well," he said. "This has been informative." He looked at Vernon with a steadiness that was almost worse than anger, because anger at least understood itself. This was the gaze of something that had outlasted every empire it had ever encountered. "He carries a protection. Some wizard put one on him when he was a baby. I imagine that's why you took him in." He let the pause sit. "Make sure you keep it intact. Let him come back to this address when the time is right. Don't mess with whatever magic is keeping him protected here." He tilted his head. "If I find out you've been interfering with the protection out of spite, you will have a problem that no amount of suburban furniture will fix." Petunia nodded. Tiny, quick, like a bird acknowledging a predator. Vernon said nothing, which was, on reflection, the wisest thing he'd done all evening. Wukong put one hand on Harry's shoulder and they walked out the front door into Privet Drive, and the door clicked shut behind them, and the summer night smelled like cut grass and petrol and, very faintly, like peach blossoms. Harry looked up at the orange-glowing sky. He had never been outside at night. "Where are we going?" "First." Wukong scratched his jaw. Somewhere you can eat a proper meal. I know a place, about 400 miles up and a dimension to the left, there's a pavilion where the immortals who owe me favors sometimes gather. The cook there does a pork belly dish that, he caught Harry's expression. You've never had pork belly. I've never had a lot of things, Harry said. Wukong was quiet for a moment, and something in the amber of his eyes went complicated, not quite grief, because Sun Wukong did not do grief the way mortals did, but the recognition again, that shape he knew. Then we'll start from the beginning, he said. That's fine. I like beginnings. He reached up and took the staff from behind his ear and let it grow, past person height, past house height, past tree height, until it scraped the underside of the orange sky and the phoenix feather circlet on his head gleamed ember gold in the streetlights. Hold on, he said. To what? Wukong grabbed Harry under the arms and in one smooth motion set him on his shoulder, where Harry grabbed the phoenix circlet with both hands. It was warm and thrummed slightly under his fingers, like a guitar string that hadn't quite finished vibrating. Ready? Wukong asked. Harry looked back once at number 4 Privet Drive. The lights were on behind the curtains. He thought about the cupboard. The spider. The broken crayon in his pocket. Yes, he said. Wukong leapt, and the world dissolved into gold. Here is what Harry would learn, in the hours and days that followed, about what he now was. He would not age the way mortals aged, but he would grow. There was a difference, and Wukong explained it over the pork belly in the pavilion above the clouds, with the stars close enough to have features. Mortal aging was the body wearing itself toward its end. Divine growth was the self expanding toward its shape. Harry would grow up, in the mortal sense, would be 11 and 15 and 17, but at 17 he would arrive at his true form and stop there, and the centuries would no longer mark him. He was not invulnerable. Invulnerable is boring, Wukong said, with great feeling, and also dangerous, because you stop being careful. You can be hurt. Some things hurt more than others. You'll learn which. He held up his arm and showed Harry a scar, thin and silver, running from wrist to elbow. From one of the celestial swords. Still got it after 60,000 years. Some things leave marks. His magic was still his. Still the innate wizarding kind he'd been born with. But now it had the chaos nature running through it the way currents run through water, present in everything, changing the character of everything, turning something that might have been merely powerful into something genuinely unpredictable. Magic with a trick to it, Wukong said approvingly. Even better. And the trickery domain meant something specific that Harry would only fully understand later. He could see the truth of things. Not red minds, that was something else, something simpler. This was the ability to see structure. To see the mechanism behind the face. To walk into a room and feel instinctively where the lie was, where the seam was, where the thing that appeared solid was actually hollow. It was perception as a divine gift, and it was the thing that would shape him more than any other aspect of his new nature, because Harry Potter had spent 4 years in a cupboard watching a spider and learning to pay attention, and now he had the divine backing to go with the habit. He slept that night on a cloud, an actual cloud, shaped and firmed by Wukong's casual immortal mastery of his environment, with the stars very close, and the pavilion lit with lanterns below, and sounds of immortals arguing over a mahjong game drifting up from somewhere. The broken crayon was in his pocket. He did not think about the cupboard. He thought about what Wukong had said, "You are the god of chaos and trickery." He tried the shape of it, the weight of it, and found that it fit the way the right key fits a lock, not with effort, but with the particular ease of a thing that was always supposed to go there. He had questions. He would have many questions, and would ask them all, because he was 4 years old and 4-year-olds ask everything, and Wukong, to his credit, and somewhat to his own surprise, answered them. Not always well. Not always patiently. But honestly, which was more than Harry had ever gotten from anyone. "Why did you take me?" "Because I recognized you," Wukong said. "I know what it looks like when something that was supposed to be big has been made small. I also know it doesn't stay that way. Will we come back?" Yes. I told you, destiny has a smell. Yours is very loud. We'll come back when it's time. What will I have to do? Wukong had looked at him then with that amber gaze, and had said something that Harry would carry for the rest of his immortal life, through every confrontation and every impossible moment and every time someone tried to tell him what he was, whatever you decide to do. That's rather the point. Below the cloud, the lanterns in the pavilion swayed in a wind that smelled like peach blossoms, and the mahjong argument resolved into laughter, and the stars wheeled slowly overhead, and the god of chaos and trickery, age 4, fell asleep on a cloud in the company of the Monkey King, and for the first time in his short life, the darkness didn't feel like a cupboard. It felt like space. Chapter 2, 7 Years Under Heaven. The first lesson was falling. Not metaphorically, Wukong flew Harry to the top of Huagua Mountain at dawn, set him on the highest peak, a place where the rock was so old it had gone smooth and gray as bone, and said, "Jump." Harry looked down. The mountain fell away in terraces of pine and cloud, the valley floor so far below it was just a suggestion of green. The wind at this height was physical, a thing with weight and intention, pressing him sideways. "Why?" he asked. "Because you need to know what your body is now. And if I find out the hard way that it can't survive the fall, then we learn something useful," Wukong said, sitting cross-legged on the rock with his chin in his hand, utterly relaxed. "But you won't. Jump." Harry looked at the drop. He thought about the peach, the burning, the thing that had settled into him like a second skeleton. He thought about the spider, who didn't ask for guarantees before it rebuilt its web. He jumped. The fall was extraordinary. The wind took him and the mountain became a wall of gray and green rushing upward past his face, and his stomach went somewhere above his head, and the valley floor came up fast, very fast, and then something in him simply responded. Not magic, not the wand-and-word kind, the deep kind, the chaos nature, reactive and instinctive, and the air around him thickened and pushed, and Harry slowed, then hovered, then hung 20 feet above the valley floor like a misplaced comma. He looked at his hands. His fingers were fizzing with gold light that faded as the instinct calmed. He looked up. Wukong was already there, hadn't flown, hadn't run, had simply been at the top of the mountain and was now here, the way space worked differently around him, crouched on a pine branch 30 feet up, grinning. "There it is," Wukong said. "What was that?" "Chaos instinct. Preservation of the interesting. The universe doesn't want you to die yet, and now you don't want to either, and those two things agree." He dropped from the branch. "Good. Now we do it again. Again. Until it's not instinct anymore. Until it's choice." They did it 14 more times that morning. By the 4th jump, Harry wasn't closing his eyes. By the 8th, he was steering. By the 14th, he pulled out of the dive 10 feet above the ground and skimmed the valley floor like a thrown stone, and when he finally dropped his feet and stood in the grass he was grinning so hard his face hurt. Wukong appeared beside him, staff across his shoulders. "How was that?" "Brilliant," Harry said, "at age 4, covered in pine needles and chaos light." "Yes," Wukong agreed. "It usually is." That was the first lesson. The lessons didn't follow any curriculum Harry could identify, which he eventually understood was the point. Wukong taught the way rivers carve canyons, persistently, without a plan, according to the shape of the ground. He taught Harry to fall and then to fly faster, until at 6 Harry could cross the span of a valley in the time it took Wukong to raise an eyebrow. He taught him transformation, not the full 72 arts, because those were Wukong's and Wukong's alone, but the principles underlying them, the way you could change the presentation of a thing without changing its nature, which was actually the most useful application and had more in common with Harry's trickery domain than with any standard shape-shifting. He taught him to read the magic in things, not spells, not yet, but the raw language, the intention embedded in objects and places and people, the script that ran underneath reality. And he taught him to fight, because Wukong was nothing if not a pragmatist about violence. "You're a god," Wukong said, on an autumn morning when Harry was 5, handing him a short iron training staff. That doesn't mean people won't try to hurt you. It means when they try, you should be better at it than them. Harry held the staff. It was plain and heavy and cold. What if I don't want to fight? Then don't fight. But know how. Wukong produced his own staff and tapped Harry's, lightly, exploratory. Intelligence without capability is just complaining. You can always choose not to use it. But you can never choose to have it if you don't. The training was brutal in the way that only immortal martial arts can be, which is to say it would have destroyed a mortal child in a week, but Harry was not a mortal child, and his body healed overnight and his muscles, though they looked like a boy's muscles, had the underlying structure of something that ate from the Queen Mother's garden. He fell. He was hit. He was knocked flat, knocked sideways, knocked into rivers and off hillsides. He got up. He came back. He got better. Not as good as Wukong, that was never the goal, and Harry understood it wasn't the goal even at 5, because watching Wukong fight was like watching weather, and you didn't compete with weather, you learned to navigate it. But good enough. Good enough to hold his own. Good enough to look at a threat and think about it rather than away from it. In between the training and the flying and the magic, Wukong told him stories. The stories were the real education. He told them sitting on mountaintops and cloud pavilion balconies and occasionally at the bottom of the eastern sea where the Dragon King's palace lit the dark water gold, because Wukong had a complicated, specific, deeply entertaining relationship with the Dragon Kings that Harry grew to appreciate over several visits. He told Harry about the Celestial Court and its politics, the Jade Emperor's bureaucracy and its absurdities, the way heaven was organized like a very officious government that had been running for so long it had forgotten what it was governing toward. He told him about Buddha and the mountain, quietly and without the flippancy he used for most things, which told Harry more about what that imprisonment meant than the words themselves did. He told him about the journey west, the pilgrim Xuanzang, the other disciples, the 108 demons and the road to the scriptures. He told it like a man describing a road trip with friends he still thought about, the good parts and the stupid parts equally. Did you change? Harry asked, once. After the journey? Wukong was quiet for a moment, which was unusual. I'm not sure change is the right word. I understood something better. What? That freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. I spent a lot of years thinking it was. I was wrong. He glanced at Harry. I'm not saying you'll make the same mistake. I'm saying it's a common one. Harry thought about this. He was 6, and he sat with it for 3 days before he said anything else about it, which Wukong had noted privately was the most impressive thing he'd seen a 6-year-old do. Is that why you took me? Harry asked, on the 3rd day. To teach me that before I have to learn it the hard way? Wukong looked at him. Among other reasons. What are the other reasons? You were in a cupboard, Wukong said simply. And you weren't crying. They traveled everywhere and they traveled without pattern, which was also the point. Harry stood in the ruins of civilizations that had been great before Britain was a word. He watched the sun rise over deserts and set over oceans that didn't appear on any map because they existed half a step sideways from the maps. He ate with immortals who remembered the world before it had continents in their current configuration and argued about whether the food was better then. He sat in on a celestial tribunal once, by accident, when Wukong took a wrong turn through a portal, or claimed he took a wrong turn, though Harry had come to suspect that Wukong's wrong turns were rarely accidental, and watched the whole proceeding with bright, quiet attention that made 3 celestial officials deeply uncomfortable. Why did they keep looking at me? Harry asked afterward. Because you could see the lie in the 3rd official's testimony, Wukong said. And he could tell you could. He was lying. Through his teeth. About what? Whether he'd been bribed. He had. Wukong shrugged. He'll be replaced. The celestial bureaucracy is corrupt in the medium efficiency way, not so corrupt it collapses, not honest enough to be trustworthy. Exactly corrupt enough to keep plodding along. You hate it, Harry observed. I have opinions about it, Wukong said, which was as close to yes as he reliably got on that subject. The trickery domain developed in Harry the way all things developed in him, not in stages, not in sudden revelations, but in the way water deepens a channel, gradually and then all at once. By age 7, he could walk into any room and within 60 seconds have a picture of its social topology, who deferred to whom, who resented whom, where the unsaid things lived, which smiles were real. It wasn't reading minds. It was reading people, the same skill as always but divinely amplified, the same attention he'd given the spider in the cupboard applied to everything. Wukong noticed. You're doing it again, he said one evening, watching Harry watch a table of immortals across the pavilion. Third one from the left owes money to the second one from the right and they've arranged the seating so they don't have to look at each other directly, Harry said. The woman at the head of the table knows this and finds it funny. The young one at the far end came here with a question and hasn't asked it yet because he's scared of the woman, which is funny because she's the only one who'd actually answer him honestly. And the one in the middle? Harry looked. Bored. Entirely bored. Thinks everyone at this table is beneath him. Correct on all counts, Wukong said, with satisfaction. What do you do with that information? Nothing, right now, Harry said. I'm just watching. Good, Wukong said. Knowing is not the same as acting. The trickster who acts on everything they know is just chaos. The trickster who chooses what to act on, he tapped his temple, that's something else. Between the 7th and 8th year, something shifted in Harry's magic. It had been building gradually, the deep magic, the chaos and trickery kind, getting more responsive, more present, more him. But at age 9, on a random Tuesday afternoon on the slopes of a mountain in what would eventually become known as Sichuan province, it crested, and for 3 seconds the air around Harry turned gold and fractured light came off him in all directions and the pine trees in a 20-foot radius leaned away from him, not from wind, just from the sheer presence of the thing expressing itself. Wukong watched this from 10 feet away with his arms folded. When the gold faded, he said, "There's your true nature." Harry looked at his hands. The light was gone, but his skin still felt warm, the way it felt after flying. It felt like, I don't know. Like something fitting. You're not just carrying the domain anymore. You're becoming it. There's a difference. Wukong sat down on a rock. The domain is choosing you back. Is that how it worked for you? In a way. Mine announced itself differently. He scratched his jaw. I pulled up a staff made of divine iron from the ocean floor and hit several dragons with it. That's more dramatic. I'm more dramatic. Harry smiled. Wukong didn't often talk about his own nature in these terms, with this kind of openness, and Harry had learned to receive it carefully. Does it feel different now than when I first became what I am? Wukong thought about it with genuine attention. It felt like being right for the first time. Like everything before it had been a draft. He looked at Harry. You'll feel that soon. He was right, though the soon stretched into 2 more years of training and travel and accumulated experience, because Sun Wukong's understanding of timelines was shaped by a life measured in millennia, and soon to him could mean almost anything. But the training intensified after that afternoon in Sichuan. Wukong started throwing things at Harry that were actually dangerous. Not training dangerous, genuinely dangerous, a minor celestial spirit he'd irritated at some point, a group of demons who lived in a cave system in the mountains above the Yellow River and who agreed to spar, messily, in exchange for some arrangement Wukong made with them that he never fully explained. The demon fight was Harry's first real fight. He was 10. The cave smelled like sulfur and wet stone. There were 4 of them, mountain demons, old enough to be solid in their power, young enough to be reckless, and they'd agreed to fight the Monkey King's apprentice at reduced intensity, which for a mountain demon meant roughly enough force to collapse a building. Harry went in with his training staff, a better one than the original, made of something Wukong had sourced from the celestial armory via channels he didn't specify, and spent the first 20 seconds getting thoroughly thrown around the cave. The first demon was fast. The second was strong. The third was clever, feinting low and striking high with a consistency that Harry locked onto in the fourth exchange. The fourth stood at the back and watched, which meant it was the real problem. Harry's back hit the cave wall hard enough to crack the rock, and he hung there for a second, the immortal body doing its work, cataloging damage, deciding it wasn't critical, and he looked at the fourth demon. Controlling the other three. Positioning them. A tactician. Harry dropped from the wall, rolled under a strike from the first demon, came up inside the second demon's reach and drove his elbow into its chest with more force than a 10-year-old body had any business generating, and felt the demon stagger. Didn't follow up. Turned, because the third demon was already committed to the strike. He'd expected the elbow to stop, and caught the strike on his forearm and redirected it into the first demon's recovering form, and then he was moving toward the fourth. The fourth demon blinked. It hadn't expected to be the target. "You've been directing them," Harry said, which was an odd thing to say in the middle of a fight, but that was the trickery domain at work. He needed the demon to know he'd seen it, needed the satisfaction of the understanding being shared. Then he hit it with everything he had, which was a lot. The cave was quiet afterward except for the sound of 4 mountain demons renegotiating their understanding of 10-year-old boys. Wukong appeared from a shadow in the corner. He'd been there the whole time, invisible, watching, and looked at the scene with the particular expression he had when something had gone better than he'd hoped, but he didn't want to admit that. "The elbow redirect," he said. "That was new. I saw it as an option in the third exchange," Harry said, catching his breath. Not because he needed to, the immortal body didn't tire the way mortal bodies did, but because breathing helped him think. "You didn't finish the second demon after you stunned it." "I didn't need to. I needed to get to the fourth." "You took a risk going for the fourth before the second was down." "I'd calculated the time. I had a window." Harry looked at him steadily. "Was I wrong?" Wukong's mouth twitched. "No." "Then why are we discussing it?" "Because I like to find out if you know why you weren't wrong," Wukong said, "or whether you were just lucky. There's a difference." "I know why." "Good." He tossed Harry a cloth for the blood on his lip. Mortal-seeming wounds happened even with an immortal body, they just healed fast. "The fourth demon would like a word, by the way." The fourth demon, as it turned out, wanted to offer Harry something, which was not the standard outcome of a 10-year-old hitting a mountain demon, but nothing about Harry Potter was standard anymore. What it offered was minor, a piece of information about a celestial trade route that Wukong found interesting but not urgent, and Harry accepted it with the kind of easy grace that you only get from years of sitting in immortal pavilions watching how things are exchanged, what the etiquette looks like, how power moves between entities who are used to it. Wukong watched the exchange with his arms folded and said nothing, but after, walking out of the cave into the mountain air, he put one hand briefly on Harry's shoulder in the way he did sometimes, quick, not lingering, because he was not a demonstrative person, and Harry understood it for what it was. The subject of Voldemort came up once, on a rainy afternoon when Harry was 8, sitting in the pavilion above the clouds while a storm moved through the valley below and lightning made the clouds underneath them interesting. Harry had been asking about the magical world, which he did occasionally, because he knew it was out there and he knew he'd have to navigate it eventually, and Wukong had been answering with his usual combination of frank information and editorializing. "There's a dark wizard," Wukong said, at some point. Technically, he tried to kill you when you were a baby. That's the protection I mentioned, on Privet Drive. Your mother's death made the protection. Old magic, sacrifice magic, the deepest kind." He paused. "He's not fully gone. That kind of ambition doesn't fully die. He'll come back in some form." Harry listened to the rain. "Is that what I'm going back for?" "Among other things." "To fight him?" Wukong was quiet for a moment. "He'll want to fight you. Whether you choose to call it a fight is up to you." Harry thought about this carefully. What does he want? Besides the obvious. The obvious is immortality and power. What he really wants, Wukong exhaled, and for a moment he looked genuinely old, not in appearance but in expression. He wants to matter so completely that nothing can erase him. He wants to be so large that death can't find him. He looked at Harry. I understand the feeling. I made the same want differently. He made it into domination. I made it into something that cracked heaven's floor. Which was better? Marginally, Wukong said, with complete seriousness. The night before Harry's 11th birthday, they were back in England. Not Privet Drive yet, they'd come back to England half a dozen times over the years, for various reasons, and Harry had checked in at the Desleys twice as instructed, both times finding Petunia tight-lipped and Vernon actively working to pretend nothing unusual had happened, which was fine. Dudley had stared at Harry on the second visit with the particular look of someone who senses a fundamental shift in the power structure but can't identify what changed. Harry had found it mildly amusing. The cupboard had been converted into storage, Dudley's excess toys. Harry had a room upstairs now, the second smallest, which represented either genuine improvement or the minimum required to maintain plausible deniability. It didn't matter much. Tonight they were sitting in a field outside of London, in the early June dark, watching the city glow on the horizon. Wukong had found a spot on a hill that smelled like actual grass and the distant possibility of rain, and he was lying flat with his staff across his chest, looking at the sky. Tomorrow, Harry said. Tomorrow, Wukong agreed. The letter will come. Probably at dawn. Owls are dramatic. You know about the letter? Harry looked at him. You knew the whole time. I know many things, Wukong said, without opening his eyes. Including that you've known about the magical world long enough that a letter from a school shouldn't be particularly surprising. It's not, Harry said. It's just, he paused, looking for the right word. It's the start of something different. I've been outside of it, looking in. Tomorrow I go in. Wukong opened one eye. Nervous? No, Harry said, and meant it, which was the thing that made it true. He was not nervous. He was, alert. Interested. The way he felt at the beginning of something that was going to require his full attention. Should I be? About a school? Wukong closed his eye again. Absolutely not. Several of the professors will probably be nervous about you, though, which is more fun. Harry smiled, looking at the city glow. He thought about what 7 years of this had made him, the flying and the fighting and the mountains and the celestial pavilions and the demon sparring and the stories and the lessons, all of it layered into him the way sediment layers into rock. He did not feel like a boy who'd been in a cupboard. He felt like what he was, the thing the peach had revealed and the years had grown, the god of chaos and trickery, 11 years old tomorrow, wearing a child's body and carrying something ancient and bright underneath it, heading into a world that thought it knew who Harry Potter was. It didn't. Wukong, Harry said. Thank you. Wukong was quiet for a moment. The city glowed. An owl passed overhead, heading southeast, carrying something in its talons. Don't thank me, he said finally, in the rough warm voice that Harry had spent 7 years learning to read. You did the work. You found me in the cupboard. Yes, well. Wukong sat up, looking at the city on the horizon with those amber eyes, and for a second he looked as old as he was, genuinely old, the kind of old that makes the space around a person feel more substantial. Someone had to. He reached into his robe and produced a peach. A small one, a different variety, green gold rather than rose, with a different frequency to its warmth. He held it out. Harry took it. Another one. Different. Not immortality, you've got that. This is a leaving gift. Something of mine, formalized. He tilted his head. My divine essence, diluted, folded into a growing fruit. When you eat it you'll carry a piece of my nature alongside yours. He paused. I'm not always going to be able to be there immediately. 68,000 years of enemies takes time to manage. But this way, a piece of me is always, he stopped. Wukong did not finish sentences like that. Harry understood this was a significant moment in the biography of the great sage equal to heaven, a man who had physically fought the entirety of heaven and won, sitting on a hill outside London talking about a piece of him traveling with a child. Harry ate the peach. The burning this time was different, less vast, more specific. Like learning a shape rather than being remade. And at the end of it he felt an additional frequency in him alongside the chaos and the trickery, something wild and bright and fundamentally insolent, a permanent low-level refusal to be told what to do, a bone-deep certainty that the universe was made for those brave enough to question it. Well, Wukong said, looking at him. That suits you. The owl they'd watched pass overhead was coming back. It descended in a long, confident arc and landed on Harry's outstretched arm before he'd consciously offered it, and dropped a letter in his hand, cream-colored parchment, sealed with purple wax. Mr. H., Potter the Hill outside London, Chiltern Hill's third rock from the gorse bush. Wukong read over his shoulder and laughed, that rough fire laugh, genuine and surprised. It knows where you are. Apparently, Harry said. He turned the envelope over. Broke the seal. Read the letter. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He read it twice. Then he looked up at the horizon. Well, he said. Well, Wukong agreed. Hogwarts. Diagon Alley first, Wukong said, stretching his arms above his head with the unself-conscious comfort of someone who does not feel the cold. School supplies. Wand. That sort of thing. He stood in one fluid motion. I want to see a goblin bank. I've heard things. Are you coming with me? To Diagon Alley. Wukong looked at him as if this was a slightly ridiculous question. Someone has to make sure you don't buy something boring. He tucked his staff behind his ear. Besides, he added, more quietly, I want to see the faces. Whose faces? The faces of people who meet what you've become and realize they had no idea what they were looking at. He smiled, and it was the wide too-many-teeth smile, the one that had, historically, made emperors reach for their weapons. That's going to be very good. Harry folded the letter. Put it in his pocket, next to the ghost of a broken crayon he'd carried for 7 years. Let's go then, he said. The city glowed on the horizon and the night was warm and the god of chaos and trickery was 11 years old and about to walk into the world that had been built around the shape of his absence, and nothing, not the letter, not the school, not the dead dark wizard who wasn't quite dead yet, not the old clever man who'd laid all his careful plans around a boy who no longer existed in the form he'd planned for. Nothing was ready for what was coming. The hill was empty. The gorse bush rustled. Chapter 3, Gold in the Alley. The leaky cauldron smelled like spilled ale and decades of accumulated magic, the kind that soaks into the brickwork until the walls themselves have opinions. Harry walked in first, Wukong a step behind him, and the pub went through 3 distinct phases in the space of 5 seconds, normal, confused, then the specific electric stillness of a room that has collectively recognized something and doesn't know what to do about it. Harry was wearing jeans and a green jacket that fit him properly, because Wukong had strong opinions about clothes that didn't fit and had made this clear with characteristic directness approximately 4 years ago. His hair did what it always did. His eyes were bright and steady behind his glasses. He still needed glasses, because the immortal body kept the shape it arrived in and Harry's eyes had always been bad, and he hadn't yet decided whether to do anything about it. He looked, mostly, like an 11-year-old boy. Mostly. There was something else. Nothing you could point to specifically, it wasn't a glow, wasn't a visible manifestation, wasn't anything a photograph would capture. But the chaos nature had been growing for 7 years, and the trickery domain was fully awake now, and the piece of Wukong's divine essence sat in him like an ember that never went out, and all of that together made the air around Harry slightly more present than the air around other people. Like the space he occupied had more weight. Like the room was aware of him. The room was definitely aware of him. Tom the barman looked up, and his expression cycled through surprise and recognition and something else, something older, the instinct of a man who'd worked a magical pub for 40 years and knew the feel of power the way a sailor knows the feel of weather. "Bless me," Tom said. "Harry Potter." The leaky cauldron did the thing rooms do when a significant name lands in them, heads turned, voices dropped, the specific hush of collective attention. Harry had been told about this, abstractly, by Wukong, who had opinions on fame and its particular textures. He absorbed it calmly. "Morning," Harry said. Then Wukong walked in. The room found a new stillness. A deeper one. Tom the barman's expression, which had been settling into something manageable, became uncertain again. Wukong was wearing robes today, his own kind, not the British wizarding variety, golden red and open at the collar, with the phoenix circlet on his head that drew the eye and then kept it, and his staff across his back, and his amber eyes moving over the room with the patient, thorough interest of something that has outlasted every room it's ever been in and finds them all equally entertaining. He looked at the pub. He looked at the magical patrons. He looked at the barman. "You have a good cellar," he said. "I can smell it from here. Who's your supplier?" Tom blinked. Ogden's, mainly. "A few, the third barrel from the left on the lower rack," Wukong said, "is something much older than anything Ogden's makes. I'd be curious what that story is." He smiled at Tom, and Tom smiled back reflexively the way people smile at things that are either very friendly or very dangerous and haven't revealed which yet. "We're going to Diagon Alley. Just passing through." "Of course," Tom said. "Right this way." They walked through to the back courtyard, and Harry tapped the correct brick with the easy confidence of someone who'd had the sequence memorized in advance. Wukong had described it, having learned it from a celestial informant who thought him knowing was funny, and Harry had committed it immediately because that was what he did, and the bricks moved and the archway opened and Diagon Alley spread out in front of them in the morning sunlight. Harry had seen markets. He'd seen the floating markets above the clouds in Wukong's world, the celestial bazaars where immortals traded things that had no mortal equivalent, the dragon palaces where treasure was so commonplace it became architecture. Diagon Alley was smaller and more chaotic and considerably less divine, but it had its own energy, the energy of a world that ran on wonder and was comfortable with that, where the extraordinary was simply Tuesday. He liked it immediately. Wukong stepped through the archway and stopped and stood in the middle of the alley entrance with his hands on his hips, looking up and down the cobblestone street with the expression of a man encountering something that is charming in its smallness. He said. "What?" "It's very compact." He tilted his head. "Cozy. Like a celestial market, but if everyone there was very earnest and slightly anxious." He pointed at a broom in a shop window, hovering 6 inches above a display stand. "Those are flying brooms." "Yes. That's a creative solution to the flying problem." He considered. "Inefficient, but creative." "I think it's charming," Harry said. "You can think that," Wukong agreed generously. "Gringotts first." "The bank." "Supplies first," Harry said. "Robes, books, equipment." "Bank first," Wukong said, in the tone he used when he'd already decided. "I want to see the goblins." Gringotts sat at the far end of Diagon Alley with the self-possessed confidence of an institution that has survived every crisis in its history by being the only thing in the building when trouble arrived. It was white marble and burnished bronze and more than slightly intimidating, which was by design, because the goblins who ran it understood that the best security was the kind that made people nervous before they even got inside. The goblin at the front desk looked up when Harry and Wukong walked in. His eyes, which were sharp in the way of creatures who have been assessing the value of things for centuries, went first to Harry and registered recognition and recalibration in quick sequence. Then they went to Wukong. The goblin's expression did not change. But something sharpened in his gaze, the way it sharpens in the presence of something that doesn't fit any established category, and he sat up straighter, which was subtle but noticeable. Wukong looked at the goblin with genuine interest. "You," he said, are not a creature that has been talked about honestly in the world outside this bank. The goblin stared at him. The humans call you short and greedy, Wukong continued pleasantly, taking in the vaulted ceiling, the other goblins moving behind their counters with brisk competence, the sense of accumulated institutional power that lived in the marble floors. But this, he gestured at the building with a sweep of his arm, this is not the work of creatures who are merely greedy. This is the work of creatures who understand that control of resources is control of the world, and who decided, at some point in their history, that they preferred to hold the gold than to chase the people who carried it. He met the goblin's eyes. Much smarter than greedy. The goblin looked at Wukong for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice like gravel and old coins, "What is your business?" "The boy has an account," Wukong said. "He'd like to access it." "I'd like to see your carts." He smiled. "I've heard things about the carts." The ride to Vault 687 was, in Harry's assessment, excellent. The cart went at the kind of speed that made the dark tunnels into a smear of torchlight and rushing air, and the cart goblin held on with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times and found it entirely normal, and Harry leaned forward into the wind with his eyes open and the chaos nature humming contentedly because chaos nature is very comfortable with velocity. Wukong sat beside him with his arms folded and his hair going everywhere and his expression composed, because he had traveled at speeds that would make this cart look stationary and was enjoying it entirely for Harry's sake, which was something neither of them acknowledged but both understood. The vault was vast and golden. Harry had known, abstractly, that his parents had left him money, but the abstract had not included this, the sheer physical mass of accumulated wealth, the torchlight catching 10,000 gold coins, the heat of it, the smell of old metal and something else, something that was almost magic itself, the residue of a family line that had been significant before it was cut short. He stood in the vault doorway and looked at it without speaking for a moment. "Yours," Wukong said, from behind him. Simply. Not "don't worry" or "it's okay" or any of the softening phrases people used around difficult feelings. Just the fact, clean and clear. "Theirs first," Harry said. "Yes. And then mine." "Yes." Harry walked into the vault and collected what was needed, a generous amount, because Wukong had given him a rough figure for school supplies and Harry's instinct for estimation was good, and then they went back up in the cart and Harry thought about his parents in the way he'd learned to think about them, not as absence, but as a thread. Something that ran backward threw him into a story he'd mostly been told secondhand. He'd get the full story eventually. He knew this the way he knew most things, with the calm certainty of someone who has learned patience from an immortal. The Hogwarts list was methodical and Harry moved through it with efficiency while Wukong wandered Diagon Alley with the staff behind his ear and the phoenix circlet glowing faintly in the morning sun and attracted, by Harry's count, 37 separate stares, for open-mouthed stops, 2 shop owners who came to their doorways and didn't say anything, and 1 extremely old witch who looked at Wukong and then looked at Harry and then put her hand over her mouth and said something in a language that wasn't English. "What did she say?" Harry asked, when Wukong came back with a paper bag that smelled like something fried and excellent. "She said, 'The mountain is teaching the river to flood,'" Wukong said. "It's an old expression. Means someone very powerful has taken a very powerful student." He offered Harry something from the bag. It was a fried dough thing, sweet and warm. "She's 300 years old at least. Possibly 4. Sharp eyes." Harry filed this away and ate the dough thing and they went to Madame Malkin's for robes. Madame Malkin's was where they encountered the first genuinely interesting complication of the day. He was already there when Harry arrived, a pale, pointed boy being fitted for Hogwarts robes, standing on a fitting block with the practiced stillness of someone who is comfortable in situations that involve being attended to. He had light gray eyes and an expression that managed to be both bored and calculating, and when Harry walked in his gaze went immediately to Harry's scar, then to Harry's face, then moved to Wukong in the doorway and stayed there. Most people's expressions shifted when they looked at Wukong. This boy's did something more specific, it assessed, rapidly and without the defensive uncertainty most people defaulted to, and then filed the assessment and returned to Harry. Hogwarts? The boy asked. Yes, Harry said, stepping onto the next fitting block. Me too. First year. He looked at Harry's scar again, not rudely, but not trying to hide the curiosity. You're Harry Potter. I am. Draco Malfoy. He said it like a name that meant something, which it did, in a world Harry had learned about from the outside in. Old wizarding family. Wealth. Particular views about bloodlines. He knew the shape of the Malfoys the way he knew the shape of the celestial officials, a family that had grown so accustomed to the existing order that they'd confused the order for nature. I know the name, Harry said. Something shifted in Draco's expression. He'd expected either the impressed recognition that the name usually got or the ignorant blankness of someone muggle-raised. He got neither. You know the name, he repeated, testing it. Your father argued against Dumbledore's re-election to the school board 3 times, Harry said, not unkindly, watching Madame Malkin pin his hem. Lost twice and withdrew the 3rd time when he figured out the vote was going against him before it happened. Your family backed the wrong side in the last war and spent a lot of money convincing people they hadn't. The grey eyes had gone very still. How do you know that? I read. A pause. And him? Draco looked at Wukong, who had taken a seat near the window and was watching with the focused interest of someone watching a theater piece they hadn't seen before. My teacher, Harry said. What is he? Old, Wukong offered, from the chair, not looking up from the street scene outside the window. Draco looked at Wukong for another moment with those assessing grey eyes, and Harry watched him make a decision, watched the calculation run and resolve, watched him choose a different register. You don't need the sycophancy, then, Draco said, turning back to Harry. I'm Draco Malfoy, have you heard of us, approach. It wasn't going to work anyway, Harry said. No, Draco agreed, something unlocking in his expression. It wasn't, was it? He was quiet for a moment. The sorting will be interesting with you there. I expect so. Slytherin? Draco asked. We'll see, Harry said. Father says Potter would never be Slytherin. Your father doesn't know what Potter is, Harry said, without heat, just factual. Madame Malkin's tape measure moved through the air around his shoulders. What house do you want? Draco blinked at the direct question. Slytherin. Obviously. All my family, what do you want, Harry said, not what the family expects. The grey eyes went complicated. It was a real question and Draco recognized it as such, and for a second the careful social surface of him shifted and something more genuine showed through it. A boy who'd been told what he was since before he could argue. Harry recognized the feeling exactly. Slytherin, Draco said again, but this time it was an answer rather than a performance. I'm ambitious. I'm strategic. I don't care about the blood politics the way my father does, but I care about, he stopped. About being good at things, Harry supplied. Yes. Then Slytherin probably fits. The house is the problem, not the traits. Harry stepped down from the fitting block as Madame Malkin finished. The traits are fine. Draco looked at him with an expression that Harry catalogued as, recalibrating, unsure whether this is being managed or genuinely spoken to, leaning toward genuine. He nodded. Not the social nod, a real one. Wukong said nothing until they were back on the cobblestones, robes boxed under Harry's arm. Then, that was well done. He's not bad, Harry said. He's just been shaped wrong. That's true of most people. Wukong bought 2 more fried dough things from a passing cart without breaking stride. He'll be useful or he'll be a problem. Probably both in sequence. I know. Ollivanders was last. The shop had that quality of deep accumulated something that the leaky cauldron had, but cleaner, less noise, less residue of other people's evenings, and more precise. The smell of it was sawdust and something electrical, the particular charge of wand wood and core material held in close proximity. Wand boxes in their towers. Dust. The sense that the room remembered every hand that had ever reached into it. Ollivander appeared from between two shelves the way he always apparently appeared, with that quality of being there when a moment ago there was no one. He was ancient and silver-eyed, and he looked at Harry the way the very old look at things they'd been expecting. "Harry Potter," he said. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." His silver gaze went to Harry's scar, and then, as it always seemed to Wukong. He stopped. Ollivander looked at Wukong the way the old witch outside had looked at him, the recognition of someone whose perception ran deeper than most. But where the witch had looked odd, Ollivander looked something more complicated. He looked at the staff. He looked at the circlet. He looked at the amber eyes. Then he looked at Harry. "My," he said, quietly. My. "Morning," Wukong said. "You are," Ollivander began. "Yes," Wukong said. "And the boy, also yes." Ollivander pressed his lips together. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh, the exhalation of someone who has just had an extremely long-standing prediction rendered obsolete. "The wand that chooses Mr. Potter is going to have an interesting time," he said, more to himself than anyone, and turned to the shelves. The first 7 wands were too polite about it, they sparked and fizzed and produced minor light shows but didn't commit, and Harry set each one down with the patience of someone who was not in a hurry because he understood that this process was real and the right answer would come. He wasn't performing patience. He just genuinely wasn't anxious. Ollivander watched this with silver eyes. "You're not nervous," he said. "Should I be?" Harry replied, and Wukong made a quiet sound from the corner that Ollivander ignored. The 8th wand was Holly and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, and when Harry picked it up the chaos nature surged and the trickery domain lit up and warm gold light came off the wand in a wave that knocked 3 wand boxes off the nearest shelf and made the electrical charge in the shop spike sharply enough that every hair on Ollivander's head lifted. Harry held the wand and felt it, not the generic warmth described in stories, but something specific. A frequency. The same frequency as the phoenix feather circlet on Wukong's head, which was not a coincidence and everyone in the room understood was not a coincidence. "Phoenix feather," Ollivander said carefully, when the light had settled. "A peculiar wand. Very peculiar. Its brother wand gave you your scar." He paused. "I think, given what I'm observing, that the wand's phoenix may have been one of your teachers." He looked at Wukong. "I've donated feathers to several wand makers over the years," Wukong said, from the corner, with elaborate casualness. "Favors. It's possible." "Possible," Ollivander said, in the tone of certainly true. He looked at Harry with the wand in his hand. "And the brother wand is in the possession of someone I'll meet eventually," Harry said. He set 3 galleons on the counter. "Thank you." Ollivander looked at him, really looked, the silver gaze doing its old deep perception thing, and said, with quiet intensity, "Whatever comes, Mr. Potter, and I believe a great deal is going to come, I think it will be rather different than expected." "Most things are," Harry said, and walked out. On the cobblestones, Wukong fell into step beside him, and for a few seconds they walked in comfortable silence through the morning crowd of Diagon Alley, past witches comparing potion ingredients and a pair of wizards arguing about Quidditch and a small child pressing its nose against the window of a sweet shop. "The feather," Harry said. Deliberate. Wukong was quiet for 3 steps. "I knew where the feather went. I know the wand maker it went to. I know what wands were made from it." He didn't look at Harry. "I chose not to mention it. Because it needed to be yours first. The wand needed to find you on its own terms." He glanced sideways. "It would have found you regardless. The phoenix feather knows where it belongs." Harry turned the wand in his fingers. The wood was warm. The frequency was steady. "Voldemort has the other one." "Yes. So when we meet, priori incantatem," Wukong said. "If your spells connect directly, the cores will react." "Just something to know." He said it the way he said most things that had dangerous implications, as information, clearly, without drama, because pretending something wasn't real didn't make you more prepared for it. They stopped at the entrance to the leaky cauldron to collect Harry's purchased things that Tom had agreed to hold, and Wukong leaned against the wall and looked at Harry with those amber eyes. "How are you?" he asked. It was a direct question, and Wukong only asked direct questions when he wanted direct answers. Harry thought about Gringotts and the vault. About Draco Malfoy on the fitting block. About Ollivander's silver eyes. About the wand in his hand and the frequency it shared with the circlet on Wukong's head, a thread of connection that ran from the bird who had shed the feather through decades of magic making to this moment. "Ready," Harry said. Wukong held his gaze. "You sure? Because once you walk back into this world properly, it's going to have opinions about you. Loud ones. People are going to want you to be something specific." "The boy who lived," Harry said. "That's the mild version. They'll want you to be a symbol. A weapon. A story. Different people will want different versions. Some of them will be smart about it." Harry looked down the alley, the bustling ordinary extraordinary world of it. "Let them want," he said. "What I am doesn't change based on what they want." Wukong was quiet. "Then, no. It doesn't. I learned that from someone," Harry added. "Shut up," Wukong said, but he was grinning, the wide too-many-teeth grin, and they went inside to collect Harry's things. The encounter happened as they were leaving. He came through the leaky cauldron door just as Harry and Wukong were heading for it, tall, old, wearing deep purple robes and half-moon glasses, with long silver hair and a beard of the same color, and eyes that were blue and bright and very, very intelligent. He had the quality of a man who had entered every room for the last 150 years knowing what it contained, a quality of total environmental confidence. He saw Harry and something happened in those blue eyes. Not just recognition. Something more layered, a complicated architecture of relief and assessment and, deeper still, something that wasn't quite guilt but was close enough to it to be interesting. He stopped. "Harry," said Albus Dumbledore. Harry stopped 2 feet from him. "Professor Dumbledore," he said. Dumbledore's gaze moved, could not help moving, to Wukong, and whatever he'd been carrying with him walking through that door underwent significant adjustment. The blue eyes absorbed the staff, the circlet, the amber eyes, the presence of the man, and Harry watched the old wizard's analytical mind work at genuinely impressive speed. He looked back at Harry. At the scar. At the eyes behind the glasses. At the way Harry stood, which was not the way an 11-year-old boy who'd grown up in a Muggle household stood, no uncertainty, no overwhelm, none of the dazzled quality that Dumbledore had clearly been anticipating. The way Harry stood was the way you stood after 7 years of being taught by a god. Rooted, easy, entirely present. Dumbledore said, carefully, "I had hoped to meet you before September 1st. To explain certain things." "About the prophecy?" Harry said. The blue eyes sharpened. "Among other things. You know about the prophecy." "I know most things that are relevant to me," Harry said, pleasantly. "Not a criticism, it's just true." Dumbledore looked at Wukong. "He's been with me," Wukong said, the simplicity of it carrying all the weight it needed to. "I see," Dumbledore said, and the 2 words contained a full restructuring of assumptions, visible to anyone who knew how to look. He was looking at Harry now with something new in his eyes, not the management impulse, not quite, but the first flicker of the realization that the management impulse might have no traction here. That the instrument of his careful plan had, in its 7 years of absence, become something the plan had not accounted for. "How much do you know?" "The prophecy. The Horcruxes, I know there are multiple, I don't know yet how many or where. The protection at Privet Drive. The function my mother's sacrifice served." Harry watched Dumbledore's face with the trickery domain perception running quietly, seeing the seams and the architecture. "I know about the Elder Wand and what you're holding. I know what you're planning to do with me, broadly. Dumbledore was very still. And what am I planning to do? Walk me toward a sacrifice, Harry said. No heat. No accusation. Just the fact, clean as Wukong always made facts. I understand the logic of it. I think the logic has a flaw, but I understand it. The leaky cauldron was quiet around them. Tom the barman had found something extremely interesting to do at the far end of the bar. The other patrons were all looking at their drinks. Dumbledore's expression moved through something that was genuinely difficult to categorize. Harry had the perception for it and it still required a second. It was the expression of a man who has been, for the first time in decades, seen clearly by someone, and who is deciding how to respond to that. You're extraordinary, he said, and he meant it, and the meaning was complicated. I've had good teaching, Harry said. I imagine you have. Dumbledore looked at Wukong again. I would very much like to speak with you, he said, at some point. I'm available, Wukong said, when it's useful. I'm also patient, which I mention because patience is the thing people expect me to lack and it surprises them. He tilted his head. You have a good mind, old man. Better than most I've met in this country. Don't waste it on the plan you've been running, it won't work the way you want it to. He's not the shape you need him to be. Dumbledore received this with a composure that was itself impressive. What shape is he? He asked. His own, Wukong said. Harry picked up his boxes. I'll see you on September 1st, Professor, he said, with complete courtesy. He looked at Dumbledore and for a moment the trickery domain ran full and clear and he saw the old man honestly, saw the guilt about Privet Drive, saw the genuine love for the magical world and the students in his school, saw the ruthless streak running beneath the warmth, saw the plan ticking over in the background of everything, mechanical and careful and built around a version of Harry Potter that had ceased to exist 7 years ago. He also saw that Dumbledore was, underneath all of it, someone who might genuinely surprise him. I'm looking forward to school, Harry added, and meant that too. They walked out into the late morning sun of Muggle London. Wukong was quiet for a block. Then, he's smart. Very, Harry agreed. He's not going to let the plan go easily. No. But he'll adapt. He's been doing it for 150 years. Harry shifted the boxes under his arm. He's not the problem. Voldemort is the problem. Voldemort is a problem. Harry looked up at the London sky. The problem is the Horcruxes, and figuring out where they are, and what to do about the one that's, he touched his forehead, where the scar was, and felt the echo of something dark and cold and old that had been sitting there since before he could remember, the one thing that the immortality and the chaos nature had not dissolved, because it predated them. What to do about this one? You felt it for a while, Wukong said. Not a question. Since the peach made me immortal, the immortality recognized it. Knew it didn't belong. He dropped his hand. It's like having a splinter made of shadow. We'll get it out. I know. Harry said it with certainty rather than hope, because certainty was what 7 years had taught him instead of hope. Hope was passive. Certainty you built. I've been thinking about how. Good, Wukong said. Tell me over lunch. They found a table at a pub 3 streets over, a Muggle pub, unremarkable, with good fish and chips and a corner booth where nobody looked at them. Wukong ordered 3 things off the menu out of curiosity and ate all of them with methodical interest, and Harry laid out what he'd been thinking about the soul fragment in his scar while the afternoon light moved across the window. Outside, the city went about its business, entirely unaware that in a corner booth in an unremarkable pub, the god of chaos and trickery was quietly planning the dismantling of a Dark Lord's most carefully constructed immortality, while the Monkey King ate chips and said things like yes, that's good, but what about this angle and you're thinking too directly, think sideways, think like the problem doesn't know it's being solved. By the time they left, the plan was rough but real, and Harry had 3 weeks before September 1st and a great deal to think about. The scar on his forehead pulsed once, faintly, as they walked out, the soul fragment stirring, perhaps, in some dim unfelt way, as if something in the dark had sensed its solver. Harry didn't flinch. He didn't reach for his forehead. He tilted his face up into the afternoon sun and kept walking, and the pulse faded, and the city moved around him, and September 1st was coming. Chapter 4, The Hat, the Hall, and the Storm. The Hogwarts Express left at 11, and Harry was on the platform at 10:45 because punctuality was one of the things Wukong had opinions about that Harry had absorbed without noticing, not anxious punctuality, not the frantic checking of clocks kind, but the calm arrival of someone who has decided when they want to be somewhere and is there. Platform 9 3/4 materialized on the other side of the barrier the way it always did, the steam first, thick and white, and then the scarlet engine resolving out of it like something from a more dramatic world pressing through into this one. The platform was busy with families and trunks and owls in cages and children in varying states of excitement and terror, and the noise of it was the particular cheerful chaos of a world starting something. Harry stood at the edge of the platform with his trunk on a trolley and Hedwig in her cage on top of the trunk, and Wukong stood beside him in his golden robes that did not look like any wizarding clothing ever made and was attracting a consistent radius of uncertain stares. "This is me, then," Harry said. "This is you," Wukong agreed. He looked at the train with the expression he had for things that were smaller than his natural scale but interesting in their way. "Same rules as always." "I know the rules." "Tell me anyway." Harry looked at him sideways. "You're being sentimental." "I am not." "You are." "It's fine." Harry looked back at the train. "Pay attention. Trust the perception. Don't hide what I am but don't perform it either. Deal with things as they are, not as they appear." He paused. "Don't get bored and cause unnecessary problems. The last one," Wukong said, "is the one I'm most worried about." "Me too, honestly." Wukong made the fire laugh sound, rough and warm, and then did something he'd done exactly 3 times in 7 years, put both hands on Harry's shoulders and looked at him directly, close range, amber eyes to green. "You're ready," he said. Not as encouragement. As assessment, the same register he used when he'd watched Harry hold his own against a mountain demon or thread a chaos working through a complex magical structure. The voice of someone reporting what they see. Harry held the gaze. "I know." Wukong let go. "I'll be around." "Not on your shoulder, you don't need that." "But around." "I know that too." He was going to say something else, Harry could see it in the slight compression of his expression, but a family erupted past them at that moment, 6 red-haired children and 2 parents, a constellation of Weasleys that Harry recognized from everything he'd learned about the wizarding world, and the moment opened into the chaos of a busy platform and Wukong stepped back and tucked his staff behind his ear and was simply gone, the way he did when he decided a moment was complete. Harry loaded his trunk, found a compartment, and sat down facing the window as the platform slid away. He'd been sitting for approximately 4 minutes when the compartment door opened and a boy looked in, round-faced and earnest, clearly anxious, with a smudge of something on his nose. "Sorry, have you seen a toad?" "His name's Trevor and I've lost him already and we haven't even left London." "No toad," Harry said. "But check the overhead rack, 3rd compartment down on the left. There's a gap in the wood where the panel meets the wall and it's exactly toad-sized." The boy blinked. "How do you know that?" "I looked at the rack when I came in." Harry tilted his head toward the corridor. "Try it." The boy, Neville Longbottom, the Trickery domain supplied the name from 2 beats of recognition and the general shape of the wizarding families Harry had mapped, disappeared down the corridor and came back 2 minutes later holding a toad with the expression of someone given a small miracle. "He was exactly there," Neville said, with wonder. "Good," Harry said. Neville hovered in the doorway, the toad tucked under his arm, clearly deciding. "Then, mind if I sit? My Grand's carriage is all ants." "Go ahead." Neville sat. He had the quality of someone who had been apologizing for taking up space for so long that it had become habitual, a quality Harry recognized with the intimacy of someone who had grown out of the same habit. He set Trevor on his knee and looked at Harry's forehead with the particular look, scar recognition. Harry knew it well by now, and then looked quickly away. "I know about the scar," Harry said, not unkindly. "You can look." "Sorry, don't apologize. It's interesting, objectively." He leaned back in the seat. "You're a Longbottom." Neville's chin came up a fraction. "Yes. Your parents were Aurors. Among the best. Bellatrix Lestrange put them in St. Mungo's." Harry said it directly because Neville deserved the directness more than he deserved the careful tiptoeing around his own history. "I'm sorry about that." Neville was quiet for a moment. Trevor croaked. "Most people don't say it like that. They look at me like I'm about to break." "You're not about to break." "No," Neville said, and something settled in his posture. "I'm not." He looked at Harry with eyes that were more perceptive than their round earnest setting suggested. "You're different than I expected. Everyone talks about Harry Potter like I know what they talk about," Harry said. "It's fine. The story they have isn't really about me." The door opened again before Neville could respond, and this time it was two of the red-haired family, the boy from the platform, Harry's age, with freckles and an easy grin and the air of someone who defaulted to cheerful as a life philosophy, and a girl Harry didn't recognize who was leading him by the arm with the decisive movement of someone on a mission. "Excuse me," the girl said, "Ron wants to see Harry Potter and I said he should ask properly." She looked at Harry. "Are you Harry Potter?" "Yes," Harry said. "Right." She turned to the boy, her point apparently made, and then seemed to decide she was interested herself. She had bushy brown hair and sharp brown eyes and the particular energy of someone who processes the world primarily through information. She scanned Harry, not his scar, his face, and then, briefly, the window, the way he was sitting, and Harry felt, with mild amusement, that she was attempting to assess him as quickly as he was assessing her. "Hermione Granger," she said. "I've read about you. About your case, I mean, what happened when you were a baby. It's in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts, though the two accounts disagree on several points." She looked at him with frank interest. "Which account is more accurate?" "Neither, mostly," Harry said. "The true version is more complicated." Hermione looked at him with an expression that said she found this deeply interesting rather than dismissive. "You'd know, I suppose." "I would." Ron had sat down beside Neville and was looking at Harry with an expression that was navigating between the famous person reaction and something more instinctive and genuine. He had the look of someone who was deciding, fairly quickly, that the famous person reaction was the wrong tool for the job. "You don't, I mean you're not," he stopped himself. "Okay, honestly, I had a whole speech prepared and it's gone completely useless because you're just a person." "More or less," Harry agreed. "I'm Ron Weasley," Ron said, dropping the last of the speech. "There are loads of us, you probably noticed on the platform. It's okay if you can't keep the names straight, most people can't." "Fred, George, Percy, Bill, Charlie," Harry said. "You're the sixth. There's a younger sister, Ginny. Your parents are Arthur and Molly. Your father works in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office and he's been trying to get a raise for 6 years." He paused at Ron's expression. "I read a lot." Ron stared at him. Then he laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, surprised out of him. "Right. Okay. That's brilliant and also slightly alarming." "It's a habit," Harry said. "Not personal." "What do you know about me?" Hermione asked, with the directness of someone who prefers to have the information out in the open. "First magical family in your line, parents are dentists, top of every class you've been in since you were old enough to be in classes, you've read the Hogwarts curriculum books cover to cover and already consider charms and transfiguration your strongest potential subjects." He looked at her steadily. "Also you're quicker than you let people see, because you've learned that being quick makes people defensive, so you slow down your responses by about 2 seconds as a social accommodation." Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. "How did you know that?" Your pacing in this conversation has been deliberate. You're running a little ahead of us and pulling back to match. It's not condescension, it's consideration. You're used to being in front. A long pause. Hermione looked at Harry with the expression of someone recalibrating at speed. That's either the most perceptive thing anyone has ever said to me, she said carefully, or the most condescending thing, and I can't decide which. Test it, Harry said. See if I'm right. Another pause, and then, unexpected, genuine, she smiled. Not the social smile. The real one, that reached the eyes and was slightly lopsided. You might be right, she admitted. I hate that. You don't, Harry said. You like being understood. She sat down. The conversation that followed was the best one Harry had had with anyone his own age, which was a low bar that Hermione and Ron cleared without effort, Hermione because her mind ran at a pace and depth Harry found genuinely interesting, Ron because he had an instinct for the human texture of things, the warmth and the humor of them, that complemented the analytical quality that Harry and Hermione shared without duplicating it. Neville contributed occasional observations that, Harry noticed, were always more precise and pointed than their delivery suggested. He had the habit of underselling himself, a habit Harry quietly filed as something to address eventually. The train moved through the countryside and the light changed from Southern English flat to Northern English dramatic, the hills getting bigger and older, and they talked about everything and nothing, the houses, the classes, what they expected, what they'd heard. Harry talked less than the others but directed more, asking the questions that opened things up, which was something the trickery domain made natural and which felt, with these three, like something he wanted to do rather than something he was doing strategically. He was, he realized, genuinely enjoying himself. He'd had companions in the last 7 years, immortal spirits, celestial officials, demon sparring partners, Wukong himself, but not peers. Not children his own age who were figuring out the same world he was figuring out, from the ground up, with no celestial advantages and no immortal teacher and nothing but their own natures to work with. There was something in that he hadn't known he was going to value. Draco Malfoy appeared in the doorway in the late afternoon, flanked by 2 boys built in the general shape of trouble, and looked at the 4 of them with his assessing grey eyes. He looked at Harry. I saved you a seat. In my carriage. A beat. Hours ago. I found better company, Harry said, without apology. Something moved in Draco's expression, not quite hurt, not quite irritation. Something in between that he covered quickly. His gaze moved to Ron and stayed there with the automatic contempt of someone who'd grown up being told what to look for when assessing Weasleys, and Harry watched the contempt and watched Draco partly know it was a performance and perform it anyway, which was the most interesting thing about him. Better company, Draco repeated. Yes, Harry said. You're welcome to join, if you want. The offer landed unexpectedly, and Draco's composure had a visible gap in it for half a second. The 2 boys behind him looked uncertain. Ron had gone the particular expression of someone sitting on something he very much wanted to say. I don't, Draco started. Suit yourself, Harry said, and turned back to Hermione, who was mid-sentence about the practical applications of Wingardium Leviosa. The dismissal was not unkind, just complete. Draco stood in the doorway for a moment, Harry was aware of it without looking, and then the door slid shut. That was interesting, Hermione said. He's not sure what he is yet, Harry said. Give him time. Hogwarts materialized out of the dark through the windows of the boats, towers and light and the impossible verticality of something built without constraint, and Hermione made a sound that was almost purely involuntary, a small intake of breath that she didn't bother to hide because she was looking at something that deserved it. Harry looked at it too. He'd seen the celestial palaces and the dragon kingdoms and things that were genuinely larger and more obviously magnificent. But Hogwarts had something else, the weight of human magic and human belief and centuries of people who had been changed here, all of it layered into the stone, and the trickery domain read it the way it read everything and found it rich and complicated and genuinely alive in the way that places sometimes got when they'd held enough meaning for long enough. It's real, Harry said, quietly, to himself. Of course it's real, Hermione said, because she'd heard him, and then looked at him with a slightly puzzled expression because she'd heard the tone and it was saying something the words weren't. I know, Harry said. That's what I meant. The Great Hall. For long tables and 1,000 candles and a ceiling that was the sky, not a copy of the sky, the actual sky, the same October stars visible through the glass of his bedroom window back in Surrey when he'd been 8 and snuck up onto the roof just to be above something, and the press of students and the noise and the smell of the feast waiting, and at the staff table along the far wall, the faces of the people who were going to teach him. He clocked them in the time it took to walk from the door to the front of the hall, where the Sorting Hat sat on its stool. McGonagall, precise, contained, the look of someone who takes their job seriously because they genuinely believe in what it is. Snape, dark and controlled and watching Harry with the specific intensity of someone managing a feeling larger than the moment required, hostility as a container for something more complicated. Quirrell, nervous in the way that was slightly off, the specific nervousness of someone who is not nervous about the right things, the wrong shape. Harry's eyes went to Quirrell and the Trickery domain pinged the same way it pinged when an immortal celestial official was lying in a tribunal, a clarity of wrongness. He filed Quirrell. He'd come back to that. Dumbledore sat at the center of the staff table and watched Harry walk in with those blue eyes running their assessment, and Harry met the gaze briefly and evenly, and Dumbledore's expression did the thing it had done in the leaky cauldron, the adjustment, the restructuring, and then composed itself. The Sorting Hat's song was, in Harry's estimation, reasonably well crafted for something made by committees several centuries ago. He listened to it with polite attention. Then the names started, and students went up one by one, and the hat considered and then announced, and the tables cheered for their new members. Granger, Hermione. Hermione walked up with her chin level and her spine straight and sat on the stool, and the hat was on her head for less than 30 seconds. Gryffindor, it announced, and she walked to the red and gold table with the smile that reached her eyes. Longbottom, Neville. Neville walked up looking like a man heading towards something unpleasant and necessary. The hat took longer. Harry watched the table, Gryffindor, which Harry suspected was right, the bravery was in there even if Neville hadn't found it yet, and after nearly a minute the hat announced it and Neville's relief was visible from 20 feet. Malfoy, Draco. Draco walked up with the practiced ease of someone who knows what's coming and has been told what it means since before they could properly read. The hat hadn't been on his head for 10 seconds. Slytherin. The Slytherin table erupted, and Draco walked to it with his chin up, and Harry watched him take his seat and exchange words with the other first years, and saw the moment Draco's eyes found Harry's across the hall. Harry gave him a small nod. Draco looked away first. Potter, Harry. The Great Hall went through the same 3 phases as the leaky cauldron, compressed. Then a silence that was heavier than the others, a whole-room suspension of sound, and Harry walked up to the stool with the easy stride Wukong had taught him, not performance, just the walk of someone who doesn't have to convince their body they belong where they're going. He sat. The hat came down. For a moment, nothing happened. Just darkness and the soft inside smell of old fabric and the faint sound of the hall breathing. Then the hat spoke. Not in the announcer's voice. In the other voice, the one that arrived directly in the mind, that had texture and personality and, Harry noted with interest, genuine surprise. Well, the hat said. Well. You as well, Harry thought back. I've been sorting students for 1,000 years, the hat said, and I have never, I want you to understand the weight of this, never encountered anything quite like you. Thank you. I think. It's not entirely a compliment. Let me look. A pause, and Harry felt the hat's perception moving through him the way old deep magic moved, unhurried and thorough, and unlike a lot of perception it was genuinely good at its job. He let it look, because he had no reason not to. Brave, obviously, that's almost background radiation at this point. Intelligent, yes, very. Loyal, yes, when it's earned, which is a real answer, not the easy one. And ambitious, but not in the way, not power for its own sake, never that. Ambitious for, the hat paused again. For understanding. For rightness. For the thing that is actually true rather than the thing that is convenient. Another pause. And underneath all of that, something very old and very chaotic. Harry offered. I was going to say free, the hat said. But yes, chaotic also. The kind of chaos that precedes change, Harry finished. Exactly. The hat was quiet for a moment. Do you have a preference? Harry thought about it honestly. He thought about the 4 houses and their natures, and about the ways he fit and didn't fit each of them, and about what Draco had asked on the fitting block and what Harry had thought since. Not Slytherin, he said. I understand the traits. But the house has calcified around one interpretation of them. Not yet. A beat. Maybe not ever. Ravenclaw would suit the mind, the hat offered. Yes. But the mind isn't all of it. Hufflepuff for the loyalty. I'm not primarily a loyal person. I'm a perceptive one. Loyalty follows from that, but it's not the root. Then, the hat said, and there was something in it that might have been satisfaction, there's really only one honest answer. Yes, Harry agreed. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Not the standard cheer, the specific, extra, building-shaking cheer of people who have been waiting for this particular name and are expressing something larger than enthusiasm. Half the hall was on its feet. Harry walked to the table and sat down next to Hermione, who was clapping with genuine feeling, and across from Ron, who was grinning the unguarded grin that was his best quality. 7 seconds, Hermione said. You were on there for 7 seconds. The hat stall record is, I know the record, Harry said. We had a conversation. Hermione looked at him. You had a conversation. It's an interesting hat. The feast appeared and the noise broke over the hall and Harry ate, properly, the way he'd been eating for 7 years, which was not the way he'd been eating at Privet Drive, and listened and watched and let the pattern of the place begin to assemble itself in his perception. The staff table dynamics. The interhouse tensions readable in the seating geography. Dumbledore watching him from the center of the high table with those careful blue eyes. Snape watching him with that too complicated intensity. Quirrell not watching him, which was somehow worse than the watching, the deliberate not looking of someone who is very aware of a thing and working to appear unaware. The trickery domain settled its read on Quirrell during the feast and finished with a certainty that had the same quality as the certainty about the 4th mountain demon, the tactician in the back, the real problem. Quirrell was a container for something else. Harry ate his roast chicken and considered the angles. After the feast, after the prefects had led the first years to the Gryffindor Tower and the password had been given and they'd climbed through the portrait hole into the circular warmth of the common room, after Neville had lost Trevor again and found him behind the fire grate and Ron had declared the dormitory beds better than expected and Hermione had already set up her books in a neat typography that implied a system, Harry sat on the edge of his bed in the quiet of the first years. Dormitory and let the day settle. The other boys were asleep relatively quickly. Ron with the ease of someone who sleeps well as a general life principle. Neville with the careful stillness of someone who decided to try and be brave about a new place. Harry lay on his back and looked at the canopy of his 4-poster and thought about Quirrell. He was thinking about angles, specifically the angle of approach, the what do I know and what do I need to confirm process that Wukong had taught him, which ran like a river when the chaos nature was up, when the trickery domain sharpened without prompting. A different sharpening than the Quirrell read. The scar pulse, the dark cold presence of the soul fragment, which usually sat quiet and dormant and manageable, had, not woken, exactly, but noticed something. Oriented. Toward the 3rd floor corridor. Harry was out of bed without deciding to be. The castle at midnight was different from the castle at dinner. It was all itself, no performance for the students, no staffed and managed version of the place. Just stone and torchlight and centuries of settled magic breathing in the walls. Harry moved through it with the silent precision of someone who had been taught to move by an immortal who once snuck into the Queen Mother of Heaven's peach garden undetected. The third-floor corridor had a door at the end that was locked with a charm that was good but not remarkable, and the Alohomora Harry had read in his first-year textbook while Hermione was doing the same on the train opened it without effort. Behind the door was a dog. 3 heads, Cerberus style, each one the size of a small car, sleeping with the concentrated abandon of something very large that feels very safe, all 3 heads arranged in different directions on the floor in a way that suggested they'd been arguing about the best position before sleeping overtook the argument. Under the dog's paws, a trapdoor. Harry looked at the dog and the dog's 3 heads breathed in slow synchrony, and the trapdoor was exactly where it should be if you were hiding something below it, and the music from the harp in the corner, charmed to play itself, was what was keeping the dog under. The trickery domain ran the scene in half a second. The philosopher's stone was below. Quirrell's wrong-shaped nervousness was about the stone. The soul fragment in his scar was oriented toward this room, oriented toward something in the person associated with this room. Voldemort, distributed into objects and now also into people, patient and cold and waiting. Harry looked at the 3-headed dog for a long moment. One of the heads twitched in its sleep, showing approximately 40 enormous teeth. He backed out of the corridor, relocked the door, and went back to bed. He needed more information. He needed to watch Quirrell. He needed to understand what protections lay below the trapdoor and in what order, because there were multiple layers. He could smell the magic from here, different magical signatures layered like sediment. He needed to decide what to do about Dumbledore's plan when he knew more about whether Dumbledore had accounted for the Quirrell variable. He did not need to do any of that tonight. The first week of classes was, in ascending order, Transfiguration, Charms, Potions, and the Troll. McGonagall was exactly what Harry had expected from his read on her in the Great Hall, demanding and fair and genuinely excellent at what she taught, with a sharpness that respected effort and had no patience for performance. She had looked at Harry with the assessing eyes of someone who has been teaching for a long time and knows how to tell the difference between confidence and arrogance, and she was clearly still deciding which category applied. Harry turned his matchstick into a needle in the first 3 seconds of the exercise, without the wand movement he'd watched her demonstrate, just the intent, the chaos nature flowing through his magic with easy familiarity, the matchstick shifting without fuss. He put it on the desk and waited. McGonagall saw it. She looked at Harry with an expression that was wrestling with itself. "How?" she said, and the word came out of her before the professional neutrality could catch it. "I thought about what a needle is," Harry said. "Not the appearance. The nature. It's more precise than a matchstick but it's not fundamentally different, both are essentially directed forms of the same raw material. You just shift the intention." A pause. "That is, a theoretically sound approach," McGonagall said carefully, "that most students don't arrive at until their 4th year." "It's how I was taught," Harry said. "By whom?" "My teacher." McGonagall looked at him for another moment. "Can you do it again?" "Intentionally, not." He turned the needle back into a matchstick and then back into a needle and then, because the chaos nature was comfortable with the going further, briefly into a small silver compass, which was arguably beyond the scope of the lesson. He turned it back into a needle. "Sorry. Got carried away." McGonagall sat down at her desk. It was the most unscheduled thing Harry saw a professor do all week, and he filed it with the private satisfaction of the trickery domain cataloging an honest reaction. Potions was Snape, and Snape was a problem in the most interesting way, which was that it wasn't the obvious problem. The obvious problem would have been Snape's hostility, the targeted questions, the dark gaze, the specific intensity that Harry had clocked in the Great Hall, and that close range became the texture of someone who had a feeling from 19 years ago and had kept it in good condition. He'd expected that. He'd prepared for it in the sense that he'd prepared for it by simply not caring, which was the most complete preparation. The interesting problem was that underneath the hostility, Snape was genuinely brilliant, and his lesson was genuinely good, and the thing the hostility was actually protecting was a man who loved his subject with the intensity that the very best teachers had and expressed it through precision and high standards and a complete intolerance of carelessness. Harry answered Snape's pointed questions with the same calm directness he answered everything, not performing composure, just having it. Snape had asked him about bezoars, what is a bezoar and where would you find one, and Harry had answered, and then answered the follow-up question, and then, because Snape had pushed a third time with the energy of someone who expected the well to run dry, had extended into the practical application and the 2 cases in 16th century potion history where bezoar administration had been documented incorrectly and caused more harm than the poison. Snape had looked at him for 4 full seconds. Where did you read that? Adalbert Waffling's Magical Theory and Libatius Borgia's Advanced Potion Making, Harry said. The second isn't a first-year text. No, Snape said, very dry. It is not. Something shifted in the room. Snape did not give Harry points, that would have required a reorganization of several feelings that had been in place since 1981, but the pointed questioning stopped and became, instead, genuine discussion, the 2 of them moving through potion theory with the quality of 2 people who are both thinking rather than one performing and one evaluating. The other first years watched this exchange with varying degrees of confusion. Hermione looked at Harry afterward. Snape actually talked to you like a person. He's a good teacher, Harry said. He's also working through something, but that's separate. Working through what? My father, Harry said. They had history. He looks at me and gets complicated. Hermione looked at him with that sharp expression she had when she was updating a model. How do you know about that? I'll tell you properly sometime, Harry said. It's a long story. The troll happened on Halloween, which felt thematic. Harry was already awake when Quirrell's panicked announcement came in the feast, or appearing panicked, the specific performance of a man who needs to create a distraction so that something he has already arranged can proceed unobserved. Harry had been watching Quirrell for 3 weeks, and the wrongness had only deepened in that time, not the nervous professor wrongness but the container for something else wrongness, and the something else oriented toward his scar in the specific directional way of the soul fragment in him orienting toward the Voldemort presence in Quirrell. And he was approximately 80% sure the troll was a planned distraction for a stone retrieval attempt that Quirrell would realize was beyond him tonight but wanted to test. He left the feast table the moment the chaos of the evacuation started. Where are you going? Ron said, half out of his seat. Hermione's in the bathroom, Harry said. She was upset at lunch and didn't come to the feast. He'd seen Hermione leave after the incident where Parvati had repeated something Hermione had said in Charms about the correct wand technique and Ron had said no wonder she hasn't got any friends with the unthinking cruelty of someone who didn't mean it as cruelty but landed it that way, and he'd watched Hermione's face do the thing faces did when something hit a bruise. Ron's own face went through something immediate and uncomfortable. I said, right. Right, I'm coming. They moved through the corridors against the current of students heading for dormitories, which was either brave or foolish, and Harry was thinking about angles when they heard it, the troll's feet on the stone, the particular impact of something very large moving without care, and then they rounded a corner and were 20 feet from it. The troll was enormous and dim-eyed and carrying a club with the easy comfort of something that had been carrying clubs since before clubs were a concept, and it was currently failing to fit through the girls' bathroom door, which was the only reason Hermione, pressed against the far wall inside, was still having a conversation rather than having become a wall fixture. Ron raised his wand with the instinct of someone who defaulted to action. Wingardium Leviosa, the club went up and the troll looked at it with the confusion of something that has never had its club leave its hand before, and Harry had already moved, into the bathroom, fast and quiet, because the troll's attention was on the floating club. Hermione looked at him. She was pale and her wand was out and she had not, he noted, dropped it or screamed, which told him something about her that he already suspected. The ceiling, she said, immediately, because she was Hermione Granger and she'd spent 3 seconds on the panic and was now doing math. If the club falls from that height, it won't fall on you, Harry said. Come here. He put himself between her and the troll with the easy physical certainty of someone who has stood between worse things, and the troll's attention came back from the floating club to the small boy in front of it, and the troll swung a fist. Harry stepped into it rather than back from it. He wasn't using the immortal nature as a shield, that would have been boring and also would have required a lot of explaining after. He used the 7 years of training, the movement principle Wukong had drilled into him with the certainty of someone who believed in it: redirect, don't absorb. He caught the wrist, the troll's wrist was the diameter of Harry's chest, and used the momentum of the swing to send the troll's arm into its own side, and the troll staggered, off balance, its forward momentum logic interrupted. The troll looked at Harry with small confused eyes. Harry looked back at it steadily. "Leave," he said. The troll blinked. "I mean it," Harry said, in the same tone Wukong used when he meant it, which was the tone of something that has already decided and is simply informing. Something in the troll, whatever dim survival sense lived underneath the aggression, received this tone and processed it and reached a conclusion. It backed up 2 steps. Then 3. Then it turned and walked down the corridor with the slightly dazed quality of something that has encountered a predator it didn't have a category for. The bathroom was quiet. The floating club dropped 3 inches and held. Ron let out a breath that sounded like it had been in storage for several minutes. "What," he said, "was that?" "Negotiation," Harry said. Hermione had lowered her wand and was looking at Harry with an expression that was working through about 7 different responses. The pale had faded. She looked at him and then at the troll-shaped absence in the doorway and then back at Harry, and when she finally spoke, what she said was, "You told it to leave." "Yes." "And it left." "Yes." "Why did it?" "Because I meant it," Harry said. Trolls are simple. They respond to intent more than spell work. If the intent is real, they read it. He looked at her. "Are you all right?" Hermione considered this question with the thoroughness she gave everything. "Yes," she said. "I think I am. A beat. Thank you." Ron kept the club up, Harry said. Ron, who was still by the door, blinked. "I did, yeah. I did do that." "Good instinct," Harry said, and Ron's expression went through something warm and a little surprised. The professors arrived 45 seconds later, Snape first, then Quirrell and then McGonagall, and they found 3 first-years standing in a bathroom that was intact and a troll that was, on investigation, wandering the grounds in the direction of the forest with the slightly confused air of a man who has decided to go home after an evening that didn't go as expected. Quirrell looked at the bathroom and the 3 students and his face did the wrong thing, the too many things thing, not fear and not relief but something calculating that flattened quickly into performance. Harry watched Quirrell watching the scene and filed the whole thing with careful precision. McGonagall looked at the 3 of them. "Explain," she said. Hermione opened her mouth, and Harry thought she was going to say exactly what happened, which was her natural setting, and then she did something that surprised him. She glanced at him first, a quick check, reading his expression, and then looked back at McGonagall and said, "I went to look for the troll. I read in curses and counter-curses that they could be redirected with the right approach. I was stupid and they came to find me." Ron looked at Hermione with an expression of such pure and uncomplicated respect that it essentially resolved whatever had happened at lunch. McGonagall's expression navigated between relief and a good telling off. "That was extraordinarily foolish, Miss Granger." "I know," Hermione said, and she did know, clearly, and it wasn't false modesty. McGonagall looked at the 3 of them for a long moment. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said, finally. Each. For the presence of mind not to make a terrible situation catastrophically worse. She looked at Harry specifically, and in the look was the same wrestling she'd had in Transfiguration, the not yet categorized quality of him, the something that didn't have a box. "To your dormitories." Walking back through the corridors, the feast having dispersed and the castle settling toward its nighttime self, Hermione fell into step beside Harry and was quiet for a moment. "You knew that about trolls," she said. "You came in knowing." "Yes." "How?" "Experience," Harry said. "Not with trolls specifically. With the principle." She was quiet again. "Then, who are you?" "Actually. Not Harry Potter the story. You." Harry looked at the corridor ahead, the torches making their pools of gold on the old stone. He thought about the cupboard and the peach and 7 years and the mountain and the celestial pavilions and the demon fight and the fallen Ancot Falls and the person Wukong had looked at on a hill outside London and said you're ready to, with the voice of someone reporting what they see. I'm working on being able to explain that properly, he said. Give me some time. Hermione looked at him. Okay, she said. But I want the full version eventually. You'll get it, Harry said. You'll probably be the first person I tell. And that, he knew, the trickery domain confirming it with the quiet certainty it had for things that were simply true, was exactly right. Chapter 5, The Dark Lord's punchline. The months between Halloween and June moved through Hogwarts the way all school terms moved, in the rhythm of classes and meals and Quidditch and the particular texture of a place that was doing what it was built to do, which was fill young minds with things worth carrying. Harry let himself be carried by it. He went to classes. He learned things. He sat with Hermione in the library and had arguments about theoretical spell construction that neither of them won cleanly, which was the best kind of argument. He and Ron played chess. Ron was genuinely excellent at chess, in the instinctive positional way that didn't always need to announce itself, and Harry was good enough to make the games interesting without being able to consistently beat him, which Ron openly enjoyed. Neville found his feet slowly and then all at once, the way quiet things found their feet, and Harry made a point of asking him questions in a way that required real answers and then listening to the answers, which was apparently a novel enough experience that Neville looked mildly startled the first 3 times before it became normal. Draco Malfoy remained a variable. He and Harry had a relationship that was neither friendship nor enmity and consistently baffled everyone who tried to categorize it. They talked in corridors with the careful respect of 2 intelligent people who had each decided the other was worth engaging with, and Draco did not participate in the Harry Potter is different and therefore threatening discourse that ran through Slytherin like a river, which Harry noted without comment. He would be something, Draco Malfoy. The shape of what wasn't clear yet, but it was there. Harry watched Quirrell. This was the constant, the background thread running through every week, the slow accumulation of a picture he was building with the same patience he'd used watching the spider rebuild its web. Quirrell sweating through his turban on warm days. Quirrell flinching from Harry at a closeness that should have been nothing. Quirrell's trips to the 3rd floor that Harry tracked with the ease of someone whose perception was divine and whose teachers had included a being who'd infiltrated heaven's celestial armory without being detected. Quirrell lingering near the restricted section on Thursday evenings. Quirrell writing letters in a cipher that was genuinely clever but had a structural flaw in the 4th character substitution that made it readable if you spent 20 minutes on it, which Harry did. The letters were to no one with an address. They were to Voldemort, or to the version of Voldemort that was sharing Quirrell's skull. Harry understood this by February. The soul fragment in his scar had been running a low-grade orientation toward Quirrell all year that confirmed the dual occupancy, the parasitic presence of something that had not finished dying trying to use the living as transportation. He told Hermione and Ron in February, in the library, at the table furthest from the door, after Hermione had put a muffling charm on the surrounding air that she'd sourced from a charm theory text she was reading ahead of the 4th-year curriculum. Quirrell, Ron said. Our Quirrell. Defense against the dark arts Quirrell. Voldemort. Yes, Harry said. Ron looked like he was doing the mental arithmetic and didn't like the sum. And you've known since Halloween. I was fairly certain. I've been confirming. 3 months, Hermione said. She had the look she got when data arrived that required significant reorganization. You've been watching him for 3 months and you didn't say anything. I needed to know what he was after and how far along he was, Harry said. Telling you earlier wouldn't have changed what needed doing. It would have just given us all more time to be anxious about it. Some of us would have liked that option, Ron said. Fair, Harry acknowledged. I should have told you sooner. I was thinking about it tactically and I forgot about the other part. Hermione looked at him. The other part. The part where you're not just resources. He stopped. The word he was looking for was mine, in the sense of belonging that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with the fact that these two people had become, over the course of 8 months, the first people his own age he'd ever chosen and who'd chosen him back. The part where you should have been in on it from the start. Hermione's expression went through something that she smoothed into practicality relatively quickly, the way she managed feelings that were inconveniently large, by finding them a task to do. Okay. So Quirrell wants the stone. What's the plan? Dumbledore knows about Quirrell, Harry said. Or suspects. The protections under the trapdoor aren't random, they're a gauntlet, multiple professors contributed to it, it's designed to stop someone getting through. But it's also designed around the assumption of a direct attempt, someone who doesn't know the system. Quirrell knows the system, Hermione said. He's a professor. He knows every step of it. Yes. Which means the protections won't hold him if he decides to go properly. He's been building toward it all year. I think he's close. Harry looked at the library ceiling. And Dumbledore is going to be called away. Soon. It's part of whatever Voldemort's working, get Dumbledore out of the castle, give Quirrell the window. Ron and Hermione looked at each other. How do you know Dumbledore will be called away? Ron asked. I don't know. I think. The Ministry has been making noise about a thing in the Prophet, a meeting about Azkaban policy, Dumbledore's been corresponding about it. A push at the right moment gets him out. He looked at them both. When that happens, we go. We, Hermione said. If you want to. Of course we want to, Ron said, immediately, with the uncomplicated loyalty that was his best quality and his most defining one. Hermione looked at Harry for a long moment with the sharp brown eyes that missed very little. You could do this alone, she said, not accusingly. Just factually. Yes, Harry said. So why? Because I don't want to, Harry said. And because you're better at some of the steps than I am and I'd rather acknowledge that than work around it. The honesty of it landed visibly, and Hermione did the thing she did with honesty, she received it straight and gave it back the same way. The enchantment's chamber will be my best contribution. The logic puzzle. I've been thinking about it for months. I know you have, Harry said. You've had that look. What look? The one you get when you're chewing on something that hasn't resolved yet. She looked at him. You're very observant. It's a domain thing, Harry said, which didn't fully explain itself, but he'd been gesturing at the bigger explanation for months now, parceling it out in the way of someone building toward a full account, and Hermione had been assembling the pieces with the patience of someone who knew she'd get the whole picture eventually. The Quidditch match in which Marcus Flint attempted to have Harry killed was, in Harry's estimation, the most fun he had all year, which said something about his calibration. The brooms during the match tried to throw him, which was Quirrell's work. The trickery domain had spotted Quirrell's lips moving with the quality of someone muttering counter-jinxes, and Harry's response to a broom trying to throw him was the same as his response to everything that tried to throw him, which was to shift his weight and change the problem. He spent 30 seconds surfing the malfunctioning broom rather than fighting it, because the chaos nature was entirely comfortable with a situation where the physical parameters were unstable, and then caught the snitch at the end of it from a handstand position 6 feet above the ground that nobody on the Gryffindor team could fully explain afterward. How, Ron had said, in the locker room. Stayed relaxed, Harry said. It was trying to shake you off. Yes. And you surfed it. The broom wasn't the enemy. Whoever was jinxing the broom was the enemy. Harry dried his hair. Fighting the broom would have been fighting the symptom. I needed to stay and play until the jinx broke. Ron considered this with the expression of someone trying to decide if this was genius or insanity and landing on both. You're mental, he said, fondly. Hermione had set Quirrell's robes on fire, which Harry had also seen and which had been neat, precise work, targeted, quick, plausibly accidental, zero collateral. He'd told her so and she'd looked quietly satisfied in the way she only did when she'd done something technically difficult well. The spring moved forward and the tension in the castle built in the particular way tension built around concealed things, not visible, not dramatic, but present in the quality of the air around the third floor, in Quirrell's escalating wrongness, in the soul fragment in Harry's scar that had gone from low-grade pulse to something more sustained, a dark pressure at the edge of his perception. Voldemort's residual awareness straining toward the stone with the patience of something that has been dying for a decade, and decided patience was all it had left. Dumbledore was called to the Ministry on a Tuesday in June. Harry was at breakfast when the Ministry owl arrived. He watched Dumbledore read the letter across the hall, watched the blue eyes make the calculation, and then, this was interesting, watched Dumbledore look directly at Harry, across the distance of the Great Hall, with a look that said several things at once. I suspect this is manufactured. I'm going anyway because I have to. I trust you to handle what happens, and I don't entirely know how to feel about that. Harry gave him the small nod back. Dumbledore left after breakfast. By noon, the scar pressure had spiked sharply enough that Harry was clocking it actively rather than as background, and he found Ron and Hermione in the library and said, simply, "Tonight." Ron looked up from a charms essay he was definitely not going to finish now. How certain? Certain enough. Hermione closed her book with the precise movement of someone filing a thing and beginning a different thing. "The cloak," she said. Harry had the invisibility cloak, had received it in a package at Christmas with a note in handwriting he didn't recognize that said, "Your father left this in my possession," and he'd known immediately it was Dumbledore, and had used it exactly twice, both times for reconnaissance of the third floor, and had not mentioned it to Dumbledore that he had it, which Dumbledore had probably already worked out. They went after the castle had settled into its late evening quiet, the three of them under the cloak, a tight fit. Ron was taller than he had any business being at 11, and moved through corridors with the practiced silence of three people who had spent a year navigating a building that occasionally moved its staircases and had opinions about where you were supposed to be. The door to the third floor opened on the first touch. The harp had stopped playing. The dog was awake. 3 pairs of eyes, the size of small moons, oriented toward the door. 3 low sounds built in 3 separate chests. "Music," Hermione said, already pulling a small enchanted harp from her bag, the one she'd sourced from the charms classroom last week on the pretext of studying the enchantment mechanics, which was true and also convenient. The harp played. The dog's eyes glazed. 3 enormous heads sank in sequence, and by the time the third had settled, the pause had shifted, and the trapdoor was clear. "You've been planning that for a while," Ron said, looking at the harp. "Since March," Hermione said. They went through the trapdoor. The devil's snare was already disturbed. Quirrell had been through recently, the plant's tendrils still reorienting from his passage, and Hermione walked them through with the brisk authority of someone who had looked at this problem in February and memorized the solution at the same time she memorized the problem. The keys room was a chaos of fluttering winged metal, and someone had already broken through. The correct key snapped, wing hanging, and they flew past it. The chessboard was intact. Nobody had come through the chess room. Ron looked at the board and the stone pieces and made a sound that was simultaneously dread and recognition. "I have to play it," he said. "You'll win," Harry said. "How do you know?" "Because you see the board better than anyone I've played against, and I include Immortals in that statement." Harry looked at him. "You'll win. But there's a cost. You know what it is." Ron looked at the board again. He was quiet for a moment with the particular quality of someone looking at something hard and deciding to do it anyway. "Yeah," he said. "I know." He played. It was extraordinary and painful in equal measure, Ron moving pieces with the focused certainty of someone who has found the exact right context for everything they are, calling commands, reading the board 3 moves ahead, and Harry watched it with the admiration he had for genuine mastery in any form, and the other part of him that was tracking the cost as it became clear that the endgame required Ron to sacrifice his own piece. "Ron," Hermione started. "I know," Ron said. "It's the only line." He looked at Harry. "Don't muck it up from here." "I won't," Harry said. The White Queen took Ron's piece. Ron went down hard and still, and Hermione made a sound that she cut off, and Harry looked at his friend on the stone floor, breathing, he could see breathing, the immortal perception reading the room with the kind of clarity he was grateful for, and said, "He's all right. He'll be all right. We need to move." "I know," Hermione said, and her voice was perfectly steady except in one very small place. She went with him through the door. The troll was already unconscious, someone had knocked it out on the way through, and Hermione pointed at it briefly. "Quirrell. He has a particular signature." She'd been tracking his magical signature for 2 months on Harry's recommendation and could read it like a word she'd seen often enough to recognize on sight. The potion room. 7 bottles on a ledge, a line of fire at one end, ice at the other, and a rolled note on the table. Hermione had it in her hands and was reading it before Harry had finished taking in the room, and he watched her face do the thing it did when a problem resolved, the small release of tension at the corners of her eyes. "Logical puzzle," she said. 7 bottles. 2 are poison, 2 are nettle wine, 1 gets you forward through the fire, 1 gets you back through the ice, and 1 is neutral. She was already running through it, eyes moving across the bottles with the methodical speed of a mind that had been waiting for exactly this kind of problem. Size of the bottle, positioning relative to the others, the rule structure means the largest and second largest can't be poison because they'd need to be obvious as deterrents, and the positioning, take your time, Harry said. "I've got it," she said, and she did, in 90 seconds flat, which was its own kind of extraordinary. She pointed to the smallest bottle on the right end. "That one gets you through the fire." She looked at it. "It's a very small amount." "1 person," Harry said. Hermione looked at him. The fire crackled at the far end of the room. "1 person can go forward," she said. "And 1 can go back." "I need you to go back," Harry said. "Get Ron. Get out of the castle and send a message to Dumbledore. He'll be back when you contact him directly, I think. He's been expecting a version of this," he said as much. "And you, go forward," Harry said. Hermione looked at the small bottle and then at Harry and then at the fire, and then did what she always did with things she'd decided, she acted. She picked up the second bottle, the one for going back. She looked at Harry with the sharp brown eyes and the real expression under the composed surface. "Don't do anything stupid," she said, which from Hermione meant, "Don't die, I will be very upset." "Stupid isn't my style," Harry said. "It isn't," she agreed. Then, Harry. What you are," she said. "The real version. I'm ready for that conversation when you come back." "When I come back," he agreed. She drank her bottle and walked back through the ice flame without looking back, because Hermione Granger had understood instinctively from their first conversation that turning back was its own kind of hesitation. Harry picked up the small bottle. The liquid inside was almost nothing, barely a mouthful, cool and faintly luminous. He thought about Wukong on the hill outside London. He thought about the first jump off Huagua Mountain, the rush of the fall and the chaos nature opening up like a sail taking wind. He drank it and walked through the fire. The final chamber was vast and mirror-dark, lit by no source Harry could identify, the light simply present the way light was present in the celestial spaces Wukong had taken him to, omnidirectional, sourceless, as if the room itself was slightly luminous. The mirror of Eriste stood at the far end, tall and ornate, framed in gold that had gone the color of very old things. And Quirrell stood before it. He had his back to Harry, staring at the mirror, his whole posture carrying the tension of a man who has gotten everything he wanted except the thing that matters, which was Voldemort's voice coming through the turban with the cold patience of something that has learned to be patient by having no other option. "The boy is here." Quirrell turned. Harry had seen Quirrell's face 100 times in the course of the year, had watched it perform nervousness and incompetence and the general texture of a man to be overlooked. The face that turned toward him now was different. The performance was gone and what was underneath it was, sad, actually. That was the first thing Harry's perception reported. Sad and certain and tired with the tiredness of someone who made a choice years ago and has been paying for it since and knows exactly the cost and pays it anyway because stopping would require a different person than the one they've become. "Harry Potter," Quirrell said, in his real voice. Not the stammer. Professor Quirrell, Harry said. You followed the gauntlet. Something almost like respect in it. You're 11 years old. Yes, Harry said. And you're not afraid. No. Quirrell looked at him for a moment with those sad certain eyes. I was afraid, he said. At your age. At every age, actually, until, he stopped. Until it became easier to be afraid of him than of everything else. Don't speak about him as if he isn't here, Voldemort said, through the turban, and the voice had the quality of all the cold in the room concentrated into sound, not loud, not theatrical, just precise and absolute and very old. Harry looked at the back of Quirrell's head, where the turban was. Hello, he said. A pause. Then, Harry Potter. The voice tasted the name like someone examining something they've been anticipating. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A frightened boy. A pause, and something moved in the voice that was harder to categorize, not humor, not quite. The ghost of it. The memory of what humor had felt like before the man became the thing that wore the name Voldemort. What are you? Currently. Harry considered. I'm someone who's going to take the stone before you do. The mirror of Eriste was 3 feet from him. He looked at it. His reflection looked back, not quite him, the trickery domain read the mirror immediately, the deep magic of it translating desire into image, and what it showed him was, not simple. Not a family portrait, not the cliched orphan's longing, though those things lived in him too, the thread back through his parents, the grief that was real even when it wasn't crushing. What the mirror showed him was himself standing in a world that was right, whatever that meant, a world where the mechanisms were honest and the power served something worth serving, and beside him the shapes of people he loved, not their faces specifically, their presences, recognizable without detail, and behind him, barely visible, old amber eyes and a fire-warm grin. He reached into his pocket. The stone was there. He'd understood the mirror's mechanism from Dumbledore's notes. The man who wanted to use the stone would see themselves using it, and it would remain in the glass, but the man who merely wanted to find it and not use it would receive it, and the trickery domain had extrapolated the logical reverse when he'd had 2 minutes to think it through in the potion room. He didn't want the stone, in any acquisitive sense. He wanted it not to be used, which was the same desire the mirror's magic was. Keyed to reward, and so the stone was in his pocket and had been since he'd looked in the mirror. He turned from the mirror with the stone in his closed fist. Quirrell's eyes went to his hand. Get it from him, Voldemort said, and the temperature in the room dropped another degree. Now. Quirrell moved fast, not defense against the dark arts fast, but the real speed of a man who had spent years studying the dark arts properly, and he had Harry's wrist before Harry finished turning, both hands gripping, and Harry felt the contact and felt something else, the reaction he'd been expecting since February, the mathematical certainty of what happened when the protection his mother had put in him, the love-death magic that lived in his blood, made contact with the servant of the thing that had killed her. Quirrell screamed. He let go and his hands were blistered where they touched Harry's wrist, the skin gone wrong in the pattern of contact, and he staggered back and looked at his hands with an expression that was beyond pain, the expression of someone who has just had a physical proof of something they tried not to believe. The protection, Quirrell said. Yes, Harry said. Don't stand there, Voldemort said, urgency cracking through the cold patience. Use the, he can't touch me, Harry said, to the voice in the turban, calmly, because the situation warranted calm and also because the chaos nature found this entire scene deeply, cosmically funny in the way that only a divine principle of change could find a Dark Lord's plan being dismantled by old love magic funny. You built your entire plan around getting Quirrell to get the stone, and Quirrell can't touch me without burning, so the plan has a flaw. I can speak for myself, Voldemort said. I know, Harry said. I was waiting for you to. A pause. The room held its breath in the way rooms held breath when the thing in them was paying full attention. Who trained you? Voldemort said, and the question had a quality beneath it that Harry's perception read clearly, not just the asked question, but the ones beneath it, the ones Voldemort would not ask because asking them would require acknowledging that he was surprised, and Voldemort did not do surprised, had built an entire architecture around never being surprised, because the thing fear of death made you was a person who could not afford to be surprised. Someone you haven't met, Harry said. I have met everyone worth meeting. You haven't met him, Harry said. You'd know if you had. What are you? Same question as before, but the register had changed. Not rhetorical. Genuinely asking, which cost Voldemort something visible even in a disembodied voice, the thing pride paid when curiosity was larger. Harry thought about how to answer this. He looked at the mirror of Eriste, at his reflection in it, at the shapes of the people behind him and the amber glow barely visible in the background. He thought about the cupboard and the peach and the mountain and the fall and the fire laugh and the lessons and everything that had been poured into making him what he stood in this room as. I'm the god of chaos and trickery, he said, and the divine name, the real one, the one in the old impossible language, resonated underneath the words like a chord underneath a melody, felt rather than heard, and the room reacted to it, the sourceless light brightening for a moment, the air thickening, the mirror's reflection flaring briefly gold. Voldemort was quiet. Then, interesting. You want to live forever, Harry said. I understand that. More than you might think. He held the stone in his closed fist. But the way you've gone about it, don't lecture me on methods, child. I'm not lecturing. I'm observing. Harry walked slowly toward the mirror, toward Quirrell, who was still cradling his burned hands with the look of a man standing at the edge of a conclusion. You made pieces of your soul into objects. You split yourself apart to avoid death. He stopped. You understand that you're already not the person who was afraid of death, right? That person is gone. You're what the fear made. What I am, Voldemort said, is beyond what that boy was. Yes, Harry said. But beyond isn't always better. He looked at Quirrell directly. He's going to abandon you, Harry said. When this doesn't work. He'll leave you with the consequences and find a new host. Quirrell's face did something complicated and honest. He knew this. He'd known it. The sad certain eyes said he'd known it for a long time. Quirrell, Voldemort said, with the particular smooth authority of a voice that was used to being the only voice in the room, he's trying to, I know what he's trying, Quirrell said. To Voldemort. Not to Harry. And in the voice was something that was the last remnant of the man who'd existed before the choice in the Albanian forest, the last fragment of Quirinus Quirrell who had been a scholar and a nervous professor and a person, before he'd looked at power and decided its cost was worth it. I know what you'll do. Quirrell, don't, Quirrell said, quietly. The room shifted. Harry felt it before he saw it, the quality of the magic changing, something large and cold and furious that had been contained in a human body deciding that the containment was no longer worth maintaining. The back of Quirrell's head began to change, the turban loosening, the presence inside expanding past its boundaries, and Harry had a second of seeing Voldemort's face on the back of Quirrell's head, present, serpentine, the red eyes finding Harry across the room, before the chaos nature rose. Not in response to a threat. Not defensively. It rose because it was invoked, because the god of chaos and trickery was standing in a room with a soul fragment that did not belong in this world and an immortal structure built on fear and a man who had unmade himself trying to unmade someone else's future, and all of that was a convergence of everything his domain existed to address. The gold light came off Harry the way it had on the mountain in Sichuan, but here it had purpose and direction, warm, not violent, not weaponized, but present in the way divine things were present, filling the room with the particular quality of something undeniable. The scar on his forehead burned, sharp and specific, and then the soul fragment, the piece of Voldemort that had sat in Harry since the night in Godric's Hollow, dormant and wrong, a splinter of shadow in a being of light, responded to the chaos nature the way wrong things responded to the thing that found them wrong. It came out. Not gradually. The way a splinter came out when the right pressure found it, sudden, complete, leaving behind a clean space that had been compressed by the foreign presence for so long it took a moment to expand. Harry felt it go. The scar went white-hot and then cold and then nothing, just skin. The piece of Voldemort's soul hung in the air of the chamber for one visible moment, a darkness with eyes, a cold miserable thing that had been separated from its source for 10 years and had not found the journey restful, and then the chaos nature addressed it the way change addressed stasis, and it was gone, dispersed, scattered into the nothing it had been spending a decade trying to avoid. Voldemort screamed. Not Quirrell's voice. The other one, the disembodied one, and it was not the cold precise fury Harry had heard in the earlier voice but something rawer, the scream of a man who has lost a piece of himself he'd thought was safely stored. A piece of his careful, painstaking immortality construction, gone. The mathematics of his survival, changed. Quirrell collapsed. Not dramatically, he folded, knees first, and the turban unwound and Voldemort's face was visible on the back of his head in the full horror of it, the red eyes finding Harry with an expression that was pure and undiluted calculation, the emotion bypassed entirely, going straight to, "What do I do now?" Harry looked at Voldemort's face on the back of a dying man's head and felt the full operation of his domain, the trickery domain seeing the architecture of the situation with absolute clarity, the chaos nature reading the room for what it was, and both of them arriving at the same conclusion. "You're not going to get the stone," Harry said. "Not tonight. Possibly not ever, if I have a say in it." He looked at Voldemort's red eyes without flinching, because the thing about being the god of chaos and trickery was that fear was not among the things he carried for this kind of confrontation. "But I want you to hear something." "I'm not interested in, you will be," Harry said. "Because I'm going to tell you something true, and you have an instinct for true things even if you've spent decades building a philosophy that denies them." The red eyes watched him. "You asked what I am," Harry said. "I told you. I'm someone who was made immortal at 4 years old by a being who outlasted heaven's bureaucracy and cracked the Jade Emperor's floor and still found something worth teaching." He looked at Voldemort steadily. "You looked at death and made yourself into something that could never die." He looked at death and made himself into something that didn't care. Those are different choices. A beat. You chose worse. Sentiment, Voldemort said. But the word came out slightly differently than intended, slightly less armored, and Harry's perception caught it and filed it. "Not sentiment," Harry said. "Arithmetic. You've been paying the cost of your choice since Godric's Hollow. I've watched you pay it tonight. You lost a Horcrux because a 4-year-old's mother loved him. You're losing this because you can't touch me without burning." He looked at Quirrell's stilling form. "And you're going to lose a host." He paused. "How many more is the cost worth?" "More than you can count," Voldemort said. "Maybe," Harry said. "We'll see." The room gave one more shudder and Voldemort's presence evacuated Quirrell with the speed of something making the calculation that the vessel was no longer viable, and Harry felt it pass through the room, cold and purposeful and diminished, smaller than it should have been, the loss of the soul fragment visible even in the texture of the presence, and then it was gone, through the walls, out into the night. Quirrell lay on the stone floor. Harry knelt beside him, which was not an instinct he'd known he had but arrived in him anyway, the same thing that had made him be straight with Neville on the train, that made him mean it when he asked how Ron was doing, that made him look at Draco Malfoy on a fitting block and ask the real question. Quirrell's eyes were open. "You could have," he started. "No," Harry said. "I couldn't. The stone, I have it." Harry looked at him. "The Horcrux is gone. From me. He lost it tonight." He watched understanding move through Quirrell's fading expression. "He'll be weaker now. Not gone, but weaker." "He'll come back," Quirrell said, with a certainty that was specific, the certainty of someone who had been in very close proximity to the thing they were describing. "I know," Harry said. "I'm not finished." Quirrell looked at him, the sad certain eyes at the very end of their certainty, and what was in them was something that had been absent from his face all year, the face he'd been showing. Not peace exactly. Not remorse, quite, though that was somewhere in it. More like the expression of someone setting down something they'd been carrying for a very long time. Extraordinary, he said, quietly. Harry stayed with him until Dumbledore came. Dumbledore arrived through the trapdoor 11 minutes after Quirrell's eyes closed, which was faster than Harry had expected and meant Hermione had moved quickly, which he'd also expected. He came through the chamber alone, no ministry representatives, just himself and the long silver robes and the half-moon glasses and the blue eyes that took in the room, the collapsed Quirrell, the mirror, the gold light that was fading from the air, and then found Harry standing by the mirror with the stone in his hand. They looked at each other across the chamber. "You destroyed a Horcrux," Dumbledore said. "Yes." "The one in your scar?" "Yes." A pause. Something enormous moving through Dumbledore's expression. "How did you?" The Chaos Nature addressed it, Harry said. "It was a wrong thing in a space that was now undeniably mine. Wrong things don't stay in that space." Dumbledore was quiet. He was doing the mathematics that Harry had known he would have to do eventually, the plan restructuring, the prophecy's accommodation of this new development, the realization that the roadmap he'd carried for 11 years had just been redrawn at a fundamental level. Harry watched it happen and felt the trickery domain read it clearly and waited. "The other Horcruxes," Dumbledore said, finally. "There are 5 others," Harry said. "Not counting the one you already suspect about the diary." He held the stone out. "I'd like to suggest that this is safe as destroyed rather than kept. It will keep being a target as long as it exists." Dumbledore looked at the stone in Harry's hand. Something moved in his face about Nicholas Flamel, the centuries of friendship, the cost, and then something else resolved underneath it, the thing he was, at his core, which was a man who had given his life to protecting something worth protecting. "You're right," he said. "I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry for the cost of it." Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes, at close range, were older than Hogwarts and more complicated, and for the first time since they'd met in the Leaky Cauldron, they weren't running calculations. They were just, looking. One person looking at another. "Who are you, Harry?" he said, and the question was real, and the real question was, "What did I almost do to you?" Harry looked at him steadily. "I'll tell you properly," he said. "When you're ready to hear it." "I think that might be soon." "I believe it might be," Dumbledore said, quietly. They stood in the chamber with the defunct mirror between them and Quirrell on the floor and the stone in Harry's hand, and outside the castle the June night was warm and full of stars, and somewhere above it all the soul fragment that had been in Harry's scar was gone, dispersed, finished, the piece of Voldemort's careful immortality that he'd put in an infant's scar 10 years ago, destroyed by the infant's own divine nature at age 11 in a chamber beneath a school. The Monkey King was going to enjoy hearing about this, Harry thought. He was going to tell it very well.